Chapter 36 Strife on the 8th day of the first month, the royal court opened once again. The carriages and sedans that moved through the city lessened and peddlers gradually filled the streets again. But just as the court opened, a grand case was pushed out. There was an official who accused Rui Wang of putting out high-interest loans in Jiangnan, of participating with the salt governance and casinos. Once this came out, it instantly caused huge ripples. On the third day, as this incident grew larger and larger, this official suddenly accused Rui Wang of having a guilty conscience and threatening his family. After he finished, under the gaze of the entire court, he rammed himself into the gold-coiled dragon pillar with his head for an instant death. This was akin to throwing water into boiling oil. The explosion rocked the entire Jing city. The emperor was so angry he fainted in the royal hall. For a time, each person in Jing defended themselves, afraid they would be involved. In Duan Wang Fu, Chu Qingju flipped through the ever-increasing states of calling cards. She furrowed her eyebrows and ordered, "In the future, if somebody asks for a meeting, just say I am sick, and Wang Yi is busy with his duties, not in the Fu and cannot receive guests." At this time, He Qi was locked in conflict with He Yuan. Duan Wang Fu didn't need to involve itself. Enough smart officials in Jing should have already found that the dead official was connected with Ning Wang. Ning Wang was also fighting with Rui Wang at this time. Everybody was content to look at the spectacle. Why involve themselves? Mu Jin nodded to show she remembered. Seeing Wang Fei's face was dark, she informed, "This morning, people from Changdagong Fu came. They said that Lao Taidai missed you." Chu Qingju gave a disdainful smile. She marveled. "When I was at Changdagong Fu, I didn't see that Lao Taidai missed me. To think they would think of me now." She just didn't like the conduct of Changdagong Fu. Right now, they don't have anyone at court. They just want to use Lao Taidai as an excuse to find information. "Tell the messenger that I received a cold a long time ago. Now when I get cold, I will get sick." Since the reputation of Changdagong Fu was already terrible, she didn't mind adding more negativity. Either way, the news that Liang Shi abused the daughter left behind by the first wife was already out there. This is good. It will stop those shameless people from trying to associate themselves. Lu added some smokeless charcoal to the copper lion basin in the corner. She said with righteous fury, "Newbie is just afraid if you let them a bit, they will try to paste themselves onto in the future." Chu Qingju heard this metaphor and couldn't help but smile. "You're thinking too much. Changdagong Fu might be shameless, but they wouldn't dare rush to fawn." With the Duke of Changda's personality, how could he bear to shame Liang Shi? As to Liang Shi, she didn't want to see her even more. The only person that might sincerely want to have good relations with Duan Wang Fu was Chu Lao Taidai. But it was a pity she was old, and she was no longer the ruler of Changdagong Fu. Mu Jin looked at Lu, forbidding her from saying what she shouldn't say. Lu was more and more brash recently. Even if Wang Fei was kind, she shouldn't use Wang Fei's favor and forget her own boundaries. Under Mu Jin's stare, Lu knew she broke protocol and quickly shut up, not daring to talk nonsense. Watching the movements between the two, Chu Qingju smiled but didn't speak. Lu's personality was a bit too brash. Letting Mu Jin teach her a bit, it was to prevent her from being harmed by this personality. In Rui Wang Fu, He Yuan smashed a teacup with a dark face. He Qi made such a good play this time. Thinking about that official that performed suicide on the pillar in the royal hall, He Yuan felt his anger reach a peak. At what time did he need to threaten a minor official? But now that the incident has reached the point of no return, Fu Huang had to calm the others and actually rescinded his qualification to attend court. Even more, he couldn't leave his Wang Fu. He never was at peace with Lao Da, but due to Fu Huang's partialness for him, he had never lost much at the royal court. He hadn't expected that this time he would suffer such a large fall. "Wang Yi, this incident is most likely complicated. As to what to do, the most important is to clean up what was going on in Jiangnan," a subordinate persuaded. "Now that this has been uncovered and revealed by Ning Wang, the emperor will definitely send somebody to Jiangnan to investigate. As long as there is no proof, then it will still be fine if a few more people die." He actually understood inside that no matter if Wang Yi could pick himself out of this incident, his reputation would be damaged. People usually believed bad news, not good news. When it was time, and there was proof that this incident had nothing to do with Wang Yi, in the eyes of others, it was the emperor that wanted to protect Wang Yi and purposefully absolved Wang Yi. In this case, Wang Yi had done these things in the first place. It's fine if a few more people die. He Yuan smiled coldly as he looked at his subordinates. He looked at another subordinate, Gao Duo. Who do you say that Fu Huang would send to investigate in Jiangnan? The retainer called Gao Duo didn't rush to speak because He Yuan called on him. He ruminated for a while before replying, Wang Yi, you are the most favored of the emperor's sons. This to you, it is the biggest factor in your favor. By now, Ning Wang's actions are getting bigger and bigger. This is increasing the emperor's wariness of him. If this one hasn't guessed wrong, the emperor will send Cheng Wang and an official that the emperor favors to Jiangnan. Laoisai? He Yuan raised an eyebrow. Laoisai is always cowardly and has no ideas. There's no need to worry there. The only problem is the accompanying official. At the royal court now, there are 4 officials that the emperor trusts the most. The first is the Marquis of Xiangqing, Tianjin Ku, who is also the junior minister of justice. But this man is Duan Wang Fei's uncle, so the emperor won't send him. The second is the minister of defense, Luo Chongqing. But this man is Cheng Wang's future father-in-law, so the emperor would have even less likelihood of sending him. The third is also the person already responsible as chief examiner for this year's examinations, the great scholar Lu Jinghong. Taking away these 3, the only one remaining is the minister of the right way Wang Wang. And this person might not be the most able, but he is very perceptive and good at pandering to the emperor's desires. Gao Duo performed a bow and said in a meaningful tone, Wang Yi, all that this one has surmised, all of it rests on the premise of the emperor's partialness for you. He Yuan finished listening and sat in thought on the chair. The franticness on his face gradually calmed. Mr. Gao's meaning, Bin Wang understands. You can all leave. Hearing the change in what Wang Yi had called him, Gao Duo left with a calm expression along the other men. After them came out of Zhang Yuan. He smoothed the scraggly hairs on his chin and smiled as he bore the jealous stares of the other subordinates as he walked out of the Wang Fu. In the front hall of Tianqi Palace, He Hong and his 3 brothers stood at the bottom. Beside them there were some officials. Maybe it was that the expression on Qingda Emperor's face as he sat on the dragon chair was too ugly, but their faces were one heavier than the other. There were more than 100 complaints from the court to investigate Rui Wang. Even if Qingda Emperor had the desire, he couldn't suppress it. His already old visage became even more ancient. Looking at the sons and officials under him, he said in helplessness, the incident of Rui Wang, Jinwen, still has suspicions. We shall wait for it all to be investigated before making a decision. Even though everybody knew this was true, but at this time, they couldn't do anything other than shout Emperor is wise and start arguing over who to send to Jiangnan. Stop. Jin has an idea about what you are all talking about. Jin will send down a decree personally tomorrow at court. You can all leave. Qingda Emperor may have understood in his heart that these accusations were true, but he couldn't bear to punish his favorite son, so he distraughtly threw everybody out. He Qi's face didn't look well as he walked out of the front hall. He didn't look at He Hong and He Ming before he swept away. It could be seen just how angry he was. He Ming blinked at De Ji, who had rushed away, and turned to look at her Ji, standing by his side as though he was waiting for him. It's late. Us brothers should return too. He Heng's smile was casual. Side D walk with her Ji? Air Ji first. Hearing this, He Ming politely let He Hong to go ahead. Us brothers don't have to follow these rules. He Hong patted his shoulder and walked first. But it was unknown whether on purpose or not, but he almost always was walking abreast with He Ming. When the two reached the gate to the palace, they met He Yuan as he came out of a carriage. He Yuan was wearing a jewel blue satin robe. He looked more serious than before, even his face was a few shades whiter. The 3 performed greetings. He Yuan looked at the 2 and asked, Is Ji and Sid preparing to leave the palace? He Hong was clear inside that He Yuan, at this moment, should be in his fu and not be appearing at the palace gates, but said with a normal face, Yes, of course. Then Didi will say farewell first. He Yuan revealed a hint of mirth on his face. Ji and Sid, take care. Sanji too. Because He Yuan didn't usually pay him attention and suddenly being mentioned, He Ming's face showed a hint of surprise. He instantly smiled and returned a greeting. Didi won't disturb Sanji anymore. He Yuan nodded and started in the direction of Tianqi Palace with large strides, accompanied by a Taijian. The jewel blue back of the figure seemed a bit fretful. Seeing this scene, when He Hung looked at He Ming, the smile on his face grew fainter. When the two separated to get on their carriages, He Hung patted his shoulder. "CD, take care of yourself." He Ming smiled and bowed with 2 hands raised in a fist. "G, take care." Looking at the horse-drawn carriage that was imprinted with the characters of Duan Wang Fu travel out the palace gates, He Ming entered his own carriage. After the curtain was let down, the smile on his face slowly disappeared. His eyes were filled with helplessness and pain. Once he came out of the carriage, and as He Hung stepped into the gate, he saw a paper wand flying in the sky as he raised his head. His eyes narrowed and he frowned as he looked at Ming He behind him. Find out who is doing it in the future. No one in the Fu is allowed to fly such a thing. In the previous dynasty, there had been people who used flying wand to pass messages to the outside. Right now, it was a tense time in Jing. He didn't want spies in his Duan Wang Fu. Yes, Ming He beckoned to the Taijian behind him. They quickly retreated and competed to use the quickest speed to find the person flying the kite. In Zhengyuan, Chu Qingju smiled at the flying beautiful wand. She turned and remarked to Mu Jin, "Look, isn't there people who use such tactics?" Mu Jin smiled warmly. Wang Fei is all-knowing. But who was it that was so stupid that they would do such an idiotic thing at this time? Chapter 37. Suspicious Chu Qingju saw the paper kite disappear after a while, and said with some pity, "Oh, the weather hasn't turned warm yet, but some already have the leisure time to fly kites. It must be such a refined person." What refined person? He Hung walked in with large steps and happened to hear this sentence. He promised with a thin smile, "If Qingchu likes it, when the weather turns warm, I'll take you to the estate to play. You can fly whatever you want." It's too tiring to run. Chu Qingju disliked it. If Wang Yi really cares for me, how about finding a few more chefs for this Fu and let me taste all the foods in the world? That's good too. After a bit, I'll take you to the estate to taste authentic peasant food. He Hung pulled her inside and took down his cape to hand to a Yahuan. Those foods might not be as refined as in the Fu, but it has a special flavor in itself. The dried meat that the estate sent over a few days ago was good. Chu Qingju poured him a cup of tea. After He Hung received it, she then sat down on the chair next to him. "I'll let them send some more over. Even if the flavor of these smoked foods is good, but it isn't good for the body to consume too much. You still have to abstain." He Hung took a drink of tea. When he heard what Chu Qingju said, he set down the teacup. "Don't act according to your likes only." Hearing this, Chu Qingju smiled and turned to trim a short pine tree. "Don't worry, Wang Yi, I won't do stupid things." On the matter of food, the ancients had been experts a long time ago. But He Hing's words, did it have a double meaning? "All right, I know you like good food and will control yourself." He Hung felt that Chu Qingju was still smiling, but the mirth had lessened. He could only helplessly change the topic. "The person who was flying the paper luan in the Fu, no matter who, you have to lock them up." Chu Qingju saw his face was slightly stern and slowly nodded. "Wang Ye's meaning is, let's investigate before anything else first." He Hung raised his cup again but didn't drink. He looked seriously at Chu Qingju. "There is always some people that don't belong to you or me in this Wang Fu." She hadn't thought that He Hung would tell such things to her. Chu Qingju looked at this man in a new light. This person definitely was decisive and ruthless, but he was gentle and elegant normally and lowered people's defenses. Wang Yi is suspicious that this person has other loyalties. "There's many ways to attract my attention. This way isn't very skilled." He Hung smiled thinly. "I saw that paper luan hadn't flown very high before the string broke and it fell outside the Fu. This isn't something done to attract my attention." Chu Qingju slightly raised an eyebrow. She had assumed that someone was using this way to attract He Hing's attentions. She hadn't thought that someone would actually use this tactic to pass on a message at this special time. Thinking to there, she gave a shallow smile and pointed out, "Maybe it's a coincidence?" "Coincidence, on purpose, it doesn't matter." He Hung calmly spoke. "We can't keep this person." The hand Chu Qingju used to trip the bonsai turned askew and cut down an additional branch. She picked up the pine branch with some pity. This pot was another one she had cut into a failure. In her last life, she had studied dancing and later became an agent in the dance circles. At the very least, she would be considered to be nimble in hand and feet. But how did she become a murderer of bonsai? Putting down the scissors in her hand, she turned to wash her hands in the copper basin a Yahuan was holding. As she wiped her hands, she said, "These things, Wang Yi can make the decisions. The only thing I can help you do is manage this Hoyuan." He Hung looked at her pale and thick fingers rubbing in the soft cotton and felt that this pair of hands was incomparably tempting. He stared in a daze before waking and praising. "You've done very well after you came. This Hoyang has become much more quiet." Putting the cotton cloth back onto the tray, she motioned for the Yahuan to retreat. Chu Qingju turned to smile at He Hung. She asked, "Is Wang Yi disapproving of Hoyang for being too quiet?" "It's not quiet, it's calm." He Hung stood and pulled the person closer to him. "I actually like the present state of Hoyuan." Flinging a flirtatious look at the other, Chu Qingju turned and sat down on a chair by the side. "It's good as long as Wang Yi likes it. I'm just afraid that Wang Yi thinks there aren't enough beautiful women and is angry at me for not being generous and virtuous enough." He Hung walked to her side and smooched a kiss on her cheek before replying. "Ben Wang's Qingju is the most virtuous, able, deferent, and intelligent." Reaching out with 2 fingers to push the other's face aside a bit, Chu Qingju raised her chin and chuckled. "Wang Yi has to remember these words." Finishing, she saw the other's face full of smile and, as though it was a great favor, she gave a kiss to his chin. He Hong was so tempted by this move that his heart was trembling. There had been women that kissed him of their own initiative before, but he just felt that only this woman's actions were the most tempting. He wasn't to resist and bent to pull the other into his embrace. "Wang Yi, we have captured the person flying the paper lawn. Wang Yi, what should be done?" He Hong had never before felt that Qian Chang Xian was this unperceptive. He took a deep breath before standing and sitting down at the front. "Come in." Chu Qingju raised a white and blue-flowered teacup to hide half her face before she turned to smile cheerfully at He Hong. He Hong coincidentally saw the look and his heart was tickled again. He gave a deep look at her, sighed in frustration and helplessness before reluctantly moved his eyes away. Chu Qingju was very satisfied with He Heng's response. She adjusted into a more dignified posture and turned her head to watch as Qian Chang Xian come in with a few others. At the very end was 2 strong mamas pinning a young woman wearing a pink dress. She looked somewhat familiar. When everybody had knelt down, Chu Qingju finally recognized this person. It was Bai Ji, one of He Heng's Tong Fong. She wasn't very clear why Bai Ji had stayed so long by He Heng's side. This person had never competed for attention and had been compliant for such a long time. Was it all an act? She had assumed that people would use she tactics to get favor. It seemed that she was wrong. It seemed, in this fight for the throne, it obviously couldn't be without the role of spies. Her eyesight wasn't far enough. This incident, to her, it was a very good lesson. If she was passing on news to the outside, what was she passing on? She was a minor Tong Fong. What could she have found? He Hung scraped the rim of the cup with the lid, making a slightly ear-piercing sound. But just this movement, it was enough to send Bai Ji into shivers of fright. "Ben Wang remembers that you became a Tong Fong 2 years ago." He Hung blew on the surface of the tea and said in a calm and emotionless tone, "The paper lawn you dropped outside, Ben Wang ordered them to pick it back. Why don't Ben Wang have a good look at that paper lawn?" Banji's face slightly changed, but she kowtowed as she pled. "Wang Yi, forgive me. Newbie didn't know it wasn't allowed to fly a kite in the Wang Fu. Wang Yi, please forgive me." Disregarding her appeals, He Hung saw Ming He come in with the paper lawn. When he took it, he saw a simple picture of a beautiful woman. Beside the picture there were 2 lines of poetry. She wore shoes embroidered with delicate designs. What trailed behind was a garment as light as the mist. He Hung looked at the beauty drawn wearing a grand set of clothing, standing at a high place. He gave a soft snort. Such a good drawing, such a good poem. Chu Qingju raised her eyebrows as she looked at Bai Ji. If she didn't guess wrong, the drawing was pointing at her? Wang Yi, Bai Ji's expression changed. Newbie hadn't been thinking clearly and forgot to avoid Wang Fei's name. Please forgive me, Wang Fei. Finishing, she started to kowtow repeatedly to Chu Qingju. A difficult expression appeared on Chu Qingju's face, and she bit her lips as she gazed at He Hung. You don't have to beg, Wang Fei. He Hung slammed the paper luan in his hand to the table and ordered icily, someone come. Baiji has transgressed against Wang Fei. Drag her into the firewood room. Very quickly, someone came to drag Baiji away. He Hung stood and said to Chu Qingju, I have some matters to attend to. Wait for me tonight to eat together. Chu Qingju nodded and tied his cape for him. She looked at the shambles of the paper luan that had been slammed into the table. This paper luan? Ming He, take the paper luan and burn it. After He Hung ordered Ming He turned to smile Chu Qingju. He grasped her hand. Don't worry. The back of her hand was being gently pinched. Chu Qingju glared once at He Hung. Seeing him turn to walk away, she finally opened. The weather is changing fast these days. If Wang Yi is going out, you have to pay attention to your body. He Hung smiled again at her before leaving Zhang Yuan with his procession. Once he was outside, his face was dark as he commanded Qian Changxian. Pay attention to see who will try to get near to the firewood room in the next few days. We would leave any of them around in the future. Qian Changxian nodded before informing quietly. Wang Yi, Wang Changming has come. To the study, He Heng's face was still heavy. Thinking about the bothersome women in the Hoyuan, a disdainful smile appeared on his lips. When he met Wang Changming, He Heng's face had recovered. Is there any news from that side? Wang Yi, Rui Wang has already entered the palace to meet the emperor. He wants Cheng Wang to go to Jiangnan. Wang Changming's face held joy. It looks like our plan succeeded. Lao San always felt that he was above us other three brothers. He looks down the most at Lao Asai. Naturally, he would want to pick a soft target. He Hung smiled coldly. Find a way to spread the news to Ning Wang. With Ning Wang's personality, if he doesn't make a ruckus, Lao San's efforts would be such a waste. Pretending not to hear the secrets between the imperial sons, Wang Changmin switched to say, this subordinate understands. What should be done at Rui Wang's side? Nobody has to do anything. With his personality, he'll do something himself. He Hung responded faintly, we just have to watch. Wang Changming instantly understood and bowed. Wang Yi is perceptive. On the second day at court, the emperor sent down the decree as expected. He ordered Cheng Wang and the minister of the right, Wei Wenguang, to investigate the incident in Jiangnan and bestowed a gold medal for, as if it was Zhan here. He asked for the two to investigate finally, to prevent those people to mistakenly accuse Rui Wang. These words boldly broadcasted the emperor's attitudes. Many were clear. Even though Rui Wang still couldn't attend court, he was still the emperor's most favored and trusted imperial son. No wonder that person was fearless. A day later, He Ming and Wei Wenguang left with men and horses under the title of imperial envoy. Everyone in Jing sympathized this unfavored Cheng Wang. Everyone knew that the emperor just wanted to go through the motions. But if he did protect Rui Wang, this was going to put onto his reputation a stain of protecting villains that would be shown to the entire populace. It could be seen just how unequal the emperor favored his sons. He Qi sat in a tea shop and looked at the procession as it left the city. His face revealed a disdainful smile. After the procession had disappeared, he put down his teacup and said to the tea scholar that was pouring tea next to him, on the road, find a chance to attack, try to not harm Cheng Wang. /N. Chapter 38. The woman in the rumors. In the deep of the night where no one was there, a dark shadow flashed at the corner of the firewood room. Before this person could near the room itself, suddenly several lamps lit up in the surroundings. He looked in surprise and found many people surrounding him. Qin Ye here has waited so many days. Finally caught this rat. Qian Changxian held a lamp as he came out of the corner. He looked disdainfully at this servant in the guise of a manservant and raised his hand. Bind him up. Don't disturb anyone else. The servants rushed in. Before the person could speak, he was gagged, bound, and dragged away. Stupid trash. Finishing, he spat on the ground. He kicked the door to the firewood room with one foot and looked down at Baiji, who was tied and gagged in the corner. He gave a joyless smile and said, Baiji Guning, Your accomplice has already been captured. Why don't we have a chat, and you tell me who let you into the foo? Baiji squirmed against the rope on her body, but the ropes were too tight, and she could not escape. She glared hatefully at Qian Changxian. Free her mouth. Qian Changxian took a whip from a person behind him. He slowly whipped it on his palm, his face still carrying a harmonious smile. Baiji Gunyang, have you thought what you're going to say? I don't know anything. Baiji hatefully turned her head away. Not looking at Qian Changxian. I just wanted to fly a paper luan. Wang Yi has the wrong person. Qian Changxian was too lazy to argue with her, but only said impatiently, there's not much difference between you saying or not. But it's such a pity for your old and young in the family, and the newly married sister of yours. How about we give you a crime of poisoning Wang Yi? Wonder what would your family have to suffer? Shameless. Baiji turned her head and stared straight at Qian Changxing. What do you want to do? You aren't the first person to praise Ye this way. Qian Changxian uncoiled the whip, the smile on his face even more visible. Suddenly the whip dealt a blow on Baiji's body. Usually the people who praise Ye like this, by now their teeth won't even be on their body. The pain caused her body to shrink. Baiji stated with a white face. Newbie is innocent. Since you are willing to give up on your family to protect your master, then Ye won't care about your family either. Qian Changxian proclaimed cheerfully, tomorrow, I'll let your family go first. Hopefully when you go down to see them, you can still face them. Tears were streaming down Baiji's face. She covered her wound and chalked out. It's His Highness Ning Wang that wanted Newbie to pay attention to the movement of the foo. Except Newbie's status was too low and couldn't pass out any news. A few days earlier, His Highness Ning Wang wanted Newbie to investigate how Wang Yi treated Wang Fei in the foo. Newbie assumed this wasn't such an important matter and so dared to pass on the news. She wasn't afraid of death, but was afraid of it involving her family. That's nonsense. His Highness Ning Wang is a straightforward and honest person. You can't slander him. Qian Changxian disagreed. Such vile slander. Wang Yi won't believe you. It's true. A while ago, Newbie's Didi entered Ning Wang Fu for a job. Newbie had no other way and did wrong things. Gong, please investigate carefully. Newbie really didn't pass on any information. Baiji cried as she knelt in front of Qian Changxian. Fine. Ye, I don't want to listen to your nonsense. Qian Changxian retreated 2 steps, not allowing Baiji to hug his leg. He said in a cold voice, Baiji died due to an illness recently. Send somebody to give her family 30 taels of silver. Finishing, he motioned for the person to pour the poisonous wine into Baiji. Thank you, Wang Yi. Thank you, Gong. Baiji trembled as she held a hand and poured down the wine. No matter what, at least Wang Yi let her family go. Qian Changxian came out of the firewood room and threw the whip to one side. He took a handkerchief that a lower-ranked Tai Jian handed over to wipe his hand. Bury the person carefully. At least she served Wang Yi before. People, they can't try to find death themselves. Those that betray their masters, they don't have good endings. Finishing, he left without a second glance. Tong Fong Baiji's death didn't arouse much interest in the foo. Everybody knew Baiji died suddenly. Curiosity wasn't allowed in the case of a sudden death. When Chu Qingju heard the news, she was trimming a newly delivered bonsai. She finished listening to Huang Yang before she put down her scissors to order. Since the person is gone, don't mention the past anymore. Get someone to send something to her family. It is Wang Ye's grace. Since He Hong said Baiji died of illness, then she had to give the appropriate response. Even Yin Lu, who was quick of the mouth, didn't say anything at the time. After Huang Yang left, she spoke with some fear. She's just gone. As a servant, you can't have multiple masters. Mu Jin sorted away the scissors that Chu Qingju placed on the table to prevent Chu Qingju from accidentally harming her hand. This way, it was very generous of Wang Yi. This type of thing, it wasn't just a life. It was possible to influence an entire family. Yin Lu didn't argue with the words. To her, all she had to do every day was serve Wang Fei well. She didn't have to think about anything else. She didn't want to think that much either. Chu Qingju propped her chin up with one hand and looked outside in boredom. In these days without a computer or phone, it was boring. She gave a yawn and drawled lazily. Mu Jin, find a storybook for me. Mu Jin retreated, but after a while, She didn't receive her novel, but Chu Qingju received a flower and gold-printed invitation. The Jean and Princess Royal? Chu Qingju looked at the invitation in her hand. At the banquet, there had been a few princesses and Junju, daughters in the imperial family, most likely daughters of Wangs. One rank lower than princess. But this Jean and Princess she had never met before. If her memory wasn't wrong, Jean and Princess was the eldest daughter of Qingdi Emperor. Her birth mother had died, but she was adopted under the Empress. The Emperor had also decreed her the title of the Princess Royal, too. She had significant status within the womenfolk, but since she married down to the Count of Beilu, she moved to live in Jingzhou and rarely returned to Jing. The rumor was that the Count of Beilu and Jean and Princess Royal were deeply in love and had one son and daughter. She was the object of admiration from many of the women at court and was the epitome of husband of wife in many people's eyes. But why was she returning to Jean now, at a time that wasn't a festival and to hold a picture-admiring banquet? She looked at the beautiful flowery Shaokai script 3 on the invitation. The invitation that was sent to the Wang Fu would have been personally written by Jean and Princess Royal. To see a person through their writing. This Jean and Princess Royal was a very talented woman. Personally writing a reply, Chu Qingju waited for the ink to dry before folding the paper. She passed it to Jean Zhan, who had been grinding the ink. Get someone to send it to the Princess Royal's Fu. At night, He Hong came to the Zhangyuan. When the two finished eating the evening meal, Chu Qingju brought up the matter. He Hong wasn't very close to his Jejia, but he did hear some rumors floating in Jing. 2 days earlier, the Princess Royal came back to Jing. You might have never met her before, but since the invitation has been sent, you can go. Chu Qingju gave him a cup of digestive tea. I already sent a reply. It's just that the picture-admiring banquet is 3 days later. The day after that would be the Lantern Festival. I was just surprised at the date that the Princess Royal had set down. When He Hong took the teacup, he took advantage and rubbed her hand. She glared at him half-heartedly. Has the Count of Beilu returned as well? He Hong shook his head. Haven't heard it. I've just heard that the Princess Royal came with her 2 children. Chu Qingju felt that there definitely had been something that happened. The Princess Royal returning before the Lantern Festival, with her children but not her Fuma. Nothing serious was occurring in Jing at this time. Why was she in such a rush? Was it that this Count of Beilu had done something and let down the Princess Royal? Because in this world, the people that were held as examples of matrimony usually would screw up. This was most likely the supposed, the more loving, the faster you die. If the truth was like this, then it was very interesting that the Princess Royal was returning to the palace right now. Don't think too much. He Hong set down the teacup and reached with a hand to scrape Chu Qingju's nose. The Princess Royal is the most noble princess among my sisters. No one dare offend her. Chu Qingju instantly understood the meaning in these words. If the Count of Beilu really did let down the Princess Royal, if the Princess Royal was so angry and wanted to get revenge, then this Count of Beilu won't have a good outcome. She looked at He Hong. These words might not be actual concern for his sister, but it was very honest. Wang Yi is right. Chu Qingju smiled. I was overcomplicating it. And, since it is already done, why don't you think about us? He Hong moved next to her body and gently bit her ear. Like when should we prepare to sleep? Finishing, he pulled on the hairpin in her hair. Instantly, her hair poured down like a stream of water. Chu Qingju smiled at him. What is Wang Yi thinking now? He Hong felt that this stare was like a string, pulling him in. He carried her up in a lengthwise embrace. What I'm thinking, Qingju will know in a while. Chu Qingju laughed out loud into his chest. The second morning, Chu Qingju sat up in the bed. She looked at the scattered clothing on the bed, then at He Hong, who was dressing in front of the mirror before she lazily retreated back into her blankets. Seeing her wake, He Hong said, Today is the Lantern Festival. I'll take you out on the carriage to sightsee. Wang Yi, you have to keep your promise. Chu Qingju flipped around upon hearing this, propping her head up on one hand to look at He Hong. Then you need to come back early. I'll wait for you. I'll certainly return very early. He Hong walked to the bed and bent down to steal a kiss from her lips. He straightened and announced, I have to go to court. If you are tired, sleep a bit more. Finishing, his gaze swept ambiguously over the red marks on Chu Qingju's collarbone. Pulling the blankets to under her chin, Chu Qingju pointed outside and gently gave a snort. Wang Yi, you should be going to court now. Xie is still tired and won't see you off. Finishing, she flipped around and left her back to He Hung. He Hung shook his head as he smiled, and his mood was light as he went out the door. Chu Qingju slept for almost another 2 hours before lazily getting out of bed. She looked calmly on as the Yahuan cleaned up the clothing under the bed. She sat at the mirror and drew her brows when she said, Jian Zhan, get someone to ask around what's going on with the Princess Royal. Jian Zhan bowed and left without a sound. Silently looking at the woman in the mirror, Chu Qingju raised the corners of her lips. Chapter 39. The reason that the Princess Royal had suddenly returned to Jing was as Chu Qingju had expected. Something had happened. It really wasn't some unexpected incident. It was just an usually good man like the Count of Bei Lu had suddenly taken a fancy for a daughter of a little official and had wanted to take the person into the fu. Such a person like the Princess Royal didn't even argue with him and crisply sent somebody with the girl to return home. Who knew that the Count of Bei Lu was so angry he installed this person a mistress outside. When the Princess Royal found out, she gathered her servants and tore down the residence that the Count of Bei Lu had outside. Then she took her children with her back to Jing. As to how the Count of Bei Lu was, the Princess Royal didn't care at all. Chu Qingju finished listening to the entire story inside. The love between husband and wife, it's just this. The daring that the Princess Royal had, a lot of it was based in the fact that she was the Emperor's daughter, that she was the Princess Royal of noble birth. If it was another woman who met such a thing, even if she left, who would help get justice for her? After Jian Zhan recited the story from beginning to end, she whispered, Newbie has also heard that the Emperor and Empress already know of the incident. The Emperor is very angry and has summoned for the Count of Bei Lu to come into Jing. A man like the Count of Bei, he hadn't really been in love. He was only wary of the status of the Princess Royal and hadn't met the woman that made his heart move. Now that he met a young and innocent girl, he forgot his wife, forgot his children, and forgot his own identity. This kind of man, compared to those womanizers, was there a difference? When He Hung came back from court, his expression wasn't well. It looked like he also knew what had happened with the Princess Royal. In the future, when you go to the Princess Royal's residence, spend some time with her. When He Hung stopped, he gave a sigh. This Count of Bei Lu is too outrageous. Chu Qingju pretended to not have known already. What is it? He Hung instantly went silent for a beat before answering. He let down the Princess Royal. Fu Huang was very angry and summoned him back to Jing. Knowing that he didn't want to go into the details, Chu Qingju smiled and said, It's late, let's eat now. He Hung glanced outside before nodding. He affirmed, It's really not early anymore. After we eat, I'll take you out to see the lanterns. He was still thinking about this event and didn't want other people's happenings to affect the mood between the two of them. He then continued, There's going to be many people tonight. I've gotten someone to prepare a veil for you. It will be good to go for a walk. Chu Qingju revealed a smile. Then let us eat quickly. I still have to change. The clothing she was wearing was beautiful, but it reached the floor and wasn't appropriate to go outside. Knowing that she wanted to go outside, He Hung smiled and agreed. Yes. He turned and washed his hands, preparing to eat. The meal started with a small bowl of yuan xiao, too. Chu Qingju used half a bowl before randomly eating a few other dishes before she started to wash her hands and rinsing her mouth. When He Hung put down his chopsticks, she stood to go to the inner room to change. Holding a cup of digestive tea, the smile on He Hung's face grew deeper. Looking at the gradually darkening sky outside, He Hung ordered Qian Chang Xian and the others to prepare a carriage. Chu Qingju changed on a blue-green tight girdled short dress. She styled her hair into a duoji. When she came out, she saw He Hung sitting at the side drinking tea. She came forward and asked, What does Wang Yi think of this? He Hung saw the short dress in blue-green that she wore. It was different than the laziness she exuded usually. Like this, she seemed to have more of the lovable nature of a young girl, just like a tender flower but which became water with a pinch. Very good. He Hung came forward to pull her hand. Let's go. It will start soon. Sitting on the carriage for a while, She found that it became gradually louder coming from the street as though they had entered a high-density area. But there wasn't anyone who blocked the carriage. The one they were riding in didn't have the symbols of the Wong Fu, but the people who could sit in a two-horse carriage, how low would their status be? After the carriage traveled for another while, it stopped. He hung past a veil to Chu Qingju, almost to the river. "Come down with me." Finishing, he got down the carriage first, holding a hand out to her. Chu Qingju gave her hand to him, allowing him to help her out of the carriage. She didn't know what the veil was made out of. Even though it seemed that a thin mist covered her view, she still could clearly see everything. Her hand was grasped in He Hing's, hidden in the other's wide sleeve. It felt a bit like the first romance between boy and girl as they came out to walk together. But Chu Qingju was very clear inside. She wasn't an innocent girl, and the other wasn't a youth in the middle of his first crush. By this time, both sides of the river shore was filled with beautiful lanterns. There were some stalls where lanterns were hung up for people to spin money and guess riddles. If they were right, they would receive a lantern as a gift. Behind the two of them were the Taijian and guards, all in common clothing, who didn't let other people crowd them. Passing through the busy crowds, Chu Qingju saw people take river lanterns as they walked towards the edge of the river and some children running around with animal lanterns. In this instant, her mood was very good. What has always been said to come, but has never really came? Wind, clouds. Chu Qingju heard the exchange and couldn't help laugh out loud. He Hung saw she was very happy and asked, "What does Qingju know?" This, placed in her previous life, it was a brain teaser that would be placed on the winter homework of elementary school children. "Of course I know." She turned to look at the people still guessing. "It's tomorrow." Hearing this answer, He Hung couldn't resist smiling. "That's correct." Behind him, he pulled on the veil and made it more secure on Chu Qingju. He then complimented, "Qingju is very smart." Finishing, he dragged her in front of a stall. "Which one do you like?" He pointed at the lanterns hung above them. Chu Qingju followed his hand to look up. She pointed to a moon rabbit lantern and commented, "That bunny is very cute." He Hung motioned for the peddler to take down the moon rabbit lantern and check the tag hanging on the lantern. It was the first part of a couplet and asked for the matching second half. Qian Changxian saw this and quickly gave money to the peddler to let his master guess the right answer to the couplet. "The rabbit's soul is connected to the silver sea." Chu Qingju recited the first line. She wasn't skilled at this topic and didn't know if He Hung could give the answer. She prepared to look at the lanterns hanging elsewhere. "The crab's mountain receives the purple star." 3. Who knew that Chu Qingju hadn't even seen clearly what was hanging on the other lantern before she heard He Hung give the matching line. She raised an eyebrow and laughed. So skilled. Just a simple couplet. He Hung took the moon rabbit lamp from the peddler and presented it in front of Chu Qingju. "For you?" She took this lantern. Chu Qingju raised it and looked in examination for a while before replying, "Thank you, Wang Yi." Seeing Chu Qingju like this lantern, the smile on He Heng's face became even more visible. It was just when he took a few steps, the smile on his face wasn't so natural anymore, because he saw He Yuan was coming straight over in his direction. Beside him, there was a woman, but she wore a veil that disguised her appearance. It was obvious that He Yuan saw him. The two brothers both stopped in their steps before they walked near each other. He Yuan's gaze swept next to He Hung. He took his eyes back. Ji has such good spirits today. Sandy is as well. He Hung casually moved to the side, managing to hid half of Chu Qingju's body behind himself. "Greetings to Duan Wang Fei." Just at that moment, the female next to He Yuan opened to speak. Hidden under the veil, Chu Qingju's eyebrow jumped. She paused for a beat before questioning. "Sanmei? Why was Chu Yusu walking together with He Yuan? What was the people of Changde Gongfu doing?" Chapter 40 To Repay Grievances Fairly. 1. Chu Qingju felt that she didn't understand what was going on. This era didn't treat women as strictly as the previous dynasty, but Chu Yusu had just reached her marriageable age of 15. She just casually walked with a Wang Yi that already had a wife on this public street. Wasn't it a bit inappropriate? She looked at the veil that the other was wearing. Her appearance was faintly unclear through the fabric, which would more easily cause others to speculate. She didn't want to involve herself in whatever Chang Dagong Fu was doing, so in the end she didn't say anything. "It is Mimi." Chu Yusu's voice was as sweet as usually and had an extra hint of gentleness. She gave Chu Qingju a slight bow. "I didn't think to be able to see Jiejia here." She had just called her Duan Wang Fei. After one call of San Mei, the other instantly changed appellations. In her voice, nothing of the conflict between Chu Qingju and Chang Dagong Fu could be heard, as though Chu Qingju was just her sister. "Just a good festival, so I came out to see." Chu Qingju had no interest to chat in front of Tu Wang Yi and an unfamiliar woman. She replied coldly and didn't speak further. Chu Wei-su saw she didn't want to speak and casually responded before stopping talking. She clearly was a perceptive person. This series of actions made Chu Qingju feel that it was a miracle that Liang Shi could raise such a daughter. It instantly became silent between the four people. Nobody spoke. Suddenly, a ball of fire exploded in the sky. Chu Qingju raised her eyes to watch. She saw the eye-catching spread of fire as she heard the cheers of people in her ears. Chu Yusu also raised her head, but she only saw the sparks as the fireworks faded. She had no desire to watch, so she turned her head to look at Rui Wang beside her. The other's handsome appearance caused her to slightly blush. "Didi has a pleasure boat by the river. How about a Ji and her Saw come together on to see the river lanterns from there?" Yuan said calmly. "It's rumored that the fireworks would be going on for 2 hours tonight. It wouldn't be as noisy on the boat. Ji, you can't disdain the boat for being too crude." Finishing, his face revealed a smile that held a hint of pride. Hearing the other mention the pleasure boat, He-hung knew this boat. It had been commissioned from the Ministry of Works specifically by Fu Huang for Lao San. He had never been on it, but he had heard people mention it. This boat had exquisite carvings all over. Since the other had the desire to boast, he couldn't reject. "That's great." Ji hadn't had the chance to see Didi's boat. "It's very fortunate to have met tonight. We'll have to disturb you." Finishing, he turned and held Chu Qingju's hand as he explained with a shallow smile. "Seeing the lights from the river, it has a distinctive flavor." Chu Qingju's index finger scratched his palm and nodded her head lightly. Yuan looked at their close conjugal state and put his hands behind his back in disgust, moving his eyes away. On the side, Chu Yusu was deeply moved. A person like De Jia who had such a dull personality, she was able to receive Duan Wang's affection. Even her personality was more outgoing than in the past. It could be seen just how great the influence Duan Wang had on her. A sense of admiration rose in her heart. A bit sour and a touch bitter, Chang Dagong Fu's days were one worse than the past one. So they thought to let her enter Rui Wang Fu. Even if she couldn't become Jing Fei, but after Rui Wang succeeded the throne, she could at least be a Fei. If she gave birth to a son, she might even have better fortune in the future. She had already accepted that she had to walk such a past, but seeing how De Jia was able to hold hands and walk together with Duan Wang, her heart still felt ill. In this world, which girl didn't want to be wearing a phoenix crown and a red cape as they married? Why did they have to wear that mountain crow dress to become another man's Shirchia? And that man, she couldn't call him her husband. The guards at the two sides quickly pushed aside the surrounding crowds, leaving behind enough walking space for their masters. Chu Qingju and He-hung walked at the very front. A feeling akin, a very important person was coming and onlookers had to leave. On the two sides of the road there were peddlers selling snacks. Yuan Shao, candy, and other foodstuffs. It had attracted many customers. She even saw a chubby child holding a bowl of hot sesame soup and wolfing it down. These fresh scenes caused her to smile. She pointed to a small stand selling sticky rice cake and commented to He-hung, "Wang Yi, that cake has sesame seeds and peanut bits on it. It seems interesting." He-hung looked at the nondescript stand. The sellers were a normal couple, past their 60s, but they seemed very energetic. "Foods outside aren't very clean. You can't eat too much." Finishing, he motioned for Qian Chang Xian to go by. Qian Chang Xian hurriedly walked to the small stand and gave a handful of copper to the owner. He even brought the bowl and spoon. Then he carefully held the sticky rice cake to He-hung. "Wang Yi, Nukai had them add extra peanuts." He-hung nodded and took the bowl to have a taste. The flavor was normal, but there was some distinctive style. He held the bowl in front of Chu Qingju. "Here, if your stomach aches at night, Don't blame me. I'm not that delicate. Chu Qingju didn't take the bowl and reached out with her left hand to hold the spoon to eat the cake. Her right hand slightly pushed aside the fabric of her veil in front of her face, totally treating He Hong like a servant of hers. Qian Changxian saw the master and mistress walk even slower and silently lowered his head. He definitely didn't see Wang Yi taking pleasure in the act. After a few pieces of cake go into her stomach, Chu Qingju put down the spoon. She took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth and commented, "The flavor is good. I just saw someone selling tofu, but it's hard to eat and walk on the road. Get the foo chef to make it for you." He hung through the bowl at Qian Changxian and wiped his hands. He declared, "You can only just taste the flavor with these, but they should be more finely crafted." Chu Qingju obediently nodded, acting like, "Wang Yi, you are right. I listen to you for everything." He Yuan, who had been following them the entire road, stayed silent. When he saw He Hung hold the bowl for Chu Shi, he felt surprise. As one of the imperial sons and descendants of the dragon, they never served anyone else. This Chu Shi had some ability to let her Ji be this happy in serving others. No wonder Mu Fei said she was a fox spirit. To wrap He Hung around her fingers, her tricks should be extraordinary. People said to marry a wife was marrying virtue. This wife that Lao had married, she probably wasn't a very worry-free one. Thinking of this, he raised his head to look at the backs of the two. This type of women, it would be better for her to be a beautiful Chia. They hadn't walked for 15 minutes when they reached the pleasure boat. At this harbor, there was only He Yuan's boat. It even had guards protecting it. The other pleasure boats were anchored far away, clearly afraid to even cause any chance of collision. He Yuan disregarded the guards as they bowed to him and ushered the couple onto the boat. As he led them inside, he informed, "This boat has 2 levels, we'll go to the top." Chu Qingju found that even the handrail of the stairs was carved with pictures of mountains and rivers. The steps her feet rested on were made from high-quality red wood. Each step was as steady as she was walking on solid ground. He Hung walked at the front, carefully pulling Chu Qingju's hand as they went up. Only when they reached the top did he let go. The windows of the boat were open. Next to the window was a set of table and chairs. He Yuan ushered the two to sit, he himself sitting down by one side before he said to the still-standing Chu Yusu, "Chu San Xiao Jia, please sit." He knew the idea that Changde Gongfu had. He didn't have any interest in this third daughter, but if he took Duan Wang Fei's Mimi as Chia, what would Lauer's face look like? His Gooderji was in love with Wang Fei, so he thought he wouldn't be angry at her. Chu Qingju sat beside the window, looking at the surface of the river as it turned red due to the lanterns on both shores. She used a hand to prop her chin as she admired the scenery. Occasionally, there were lotus lanterns that floated by, the candle in the middle fluttering, creating another kind of beauty in the night. In the cold night, a guest has come with such urgency that tea has to substitute for wine. The water started boiling in the bamboo pot, the fire crimson red and hot. He Yuan raised a teacup, saw, "Why don't you taste this boat's tea?" Chu Qingju heard his words and felt this couple of Rui Wang both had the habit of wanting people to taste tea. A person like her that didn't have much learning in tea, the thing she disliked most was hearing this type of question. She raised the veil, revealing an ivory chin. Chu Qingju smiled as she took a sip and then she lowered her veil, elegantly putting the cup back on the table. Simple and elegant, the taste lingers in the mouth. He Hung put down the teacup and smiled. He praised, "Sandy has such leisurely days. Erji can't find good things like this. Recently, I don't have to go to court, so naturally I will spend more attention on these things." He Yuan said with a mirthless smile, "Erji has busy duties, there's no attention left for these common things." Seeing the other mention the court, He Hung turned his head to look outside the window. He turned his head back to say, "Sandy is joking. Fu Huang is just angry momentarily. Once Sid has uncovered the truth, I'm afraid Sandy will be busy with the court again. I hope Sid can return soon and wash away the accusations again." Didi, He Yuan gave a seemingly helpless sigh. He turned and said to Chu Yusu, who had stayed silent by one side, "I've heard that San Xiaojia's is exceptional at the qin. Is it possible for this small Wang to hear a song?" Under the veil, Chu Yusu's face froze. After a slight pause, she put down the teacup in her hands. With a light voice she said, "An inelegant song. Hope everyone doesn't laugh." Finishing, she walked to sit behind the chin. When she plucked the chords, notes rang out. The smile on He Heng's face didn't change, but he looked down even more at the people of Changde Gongfu. Now, Qingju was Duan Wang Fei. Chu Yusu, as her sister, was willing to play music for Rue Wang. A daughter of a Gongfu, she was rushing to become a Cheshire. He didn't know if it shamed Qingju or the reputation of Changde Gongfu. Chu Yusu's skills were good. Chu Qingju listened and had a deeper understanding of the arrogance of He Yuan. He could, in front of her as his saw, let Chu Yusu play for him. That was clearly saying that he didn't even put any importance on He Hong and his saw. Arrogant people usually died early. Chu Qingju smiled icily. Just this type of tactics, and he wanted to be emperor. He was delusional. And this Changde Gongfu, it was too shameless. Thankfully, the entire Jing city knew that she, as Duan Wang Fei, wasn't close to Changde Gongfu. Otherwise, if they didn't care about humiliating themselves, she cared. Chu Yusu played a famous song called Clouds Over Shao and Xiangjiang Rivers, too. Some thought this was a song lamenting the present and reminiscing on the past, but others felt this song just simply described the scenery. No matter what, this song required very high skills. If there were any weakness, they couldn't play the meaning in the song. Chu Qingju wasn't an expert in the guqin, but as a former dancer, she did have a sense of music. At least she could hear that when Chu Yusu was playing this song, her mood wasn't as good as imagined. San Xiaoji's skills are as extraordinary as said. He Yuang listened for a while before continuing to drink tea. He suddenly remarked, "Air Saw's skills must be extraordinary as well." These words overstepped. Chu Qingju smiled rather than get angry. The motion she made as she set down the teacup was heavier than before. She retorted icily, "Sanshu does indeed have lots of leisure time. No wonder you would pay attention to such insignificant matters." These words were very impolite. It didn't leave behind any coverings for He Yuan. Sitting by her side, He Hung didn't speak, clearly feeling that there was nothing wrong with what Chu Qingju had just done. He Yuan's face showed an astonished expression. When he had finished speaking, he had already detected it wasn't proper, but he was used to being brash, and didn't expect that this or saw would be so impolite. A flame burned in his heart. He looked at He Hong and saw the other's expression wasn't very good. He could only raise his teacup. "It's Didi that transgressed, or saw. Please forgive me." Chu Qingju lazily raised her teacup. "Sanshu is too polite." But she didn't drink the tea. A sliver of a smile appeared on He Heng's face. He raised the teacup and said to He Yuan, "Sandy, this tea isn't wine. Don't get intoxicated." His woman, she showed have this daring. If she had to silently suffer such a thing, where did it put him as the husband? He Yuan squeezed out a smile and took a drink, but he felt that the tea in his mouth was bitter and harsh, the fire in his heart unable to be doused. And one is an idiom that states to justly treat people that they hate. 2 is a place who nan /in. Chapter 41. Once Clouds Over Shao and Xiangjian Rivers finished, Chu Yusu took down her hands and elegantly stood to bow to the three people before she returned to her seat. Chu Qingju saw her fingertips appear to be slightly red and her eyebrow twitched. She turned her head to look at the desserts in front of her and reached with a hand to pick one. He Hung looked at the pile of salty pastries on the place getting smaller and smaller and opened to warn, "Careful you don't get thirsty." Eating this kind of pastries at night, wasn't she afraid of getting fat? Raising her teacup for a sip, Chu Qingju didn't eat any more pastries and pointed with emotion at the fireworks blooming outside the window. The fireworks last year must have been as beautiful as today's, but Xia was in the Fu and could only see the light when the fireworks erupted, not how beautiful it was. Hearing this, Chu Yusu's heart jumped. Last year's Lantern Festival, she and Didi came out to look at the lanterns. Dejie and Erjie had been left behind in the Fu. In the past, she had felt somewhat guilty, but if Dejie wasn't present, it was more carefree. Now that she was hearing Dejie mention the incident, she felt strangely insecure inside. In the future, you will see the fireworks each year until you get sick of it. He Hung tilted his head towards the windows. the flames painting his eyes red and blurring his gaze. The past. Don't place too much importance on it. Finishing, he moved his eyes and kept on drinking his tea. On the side, He-Yuan hadn't spoke since he had been flayed by Chu-Ching-ju. He clearly was trying to suppress his anger, but to He-Hong, He-Yuan's flames weren't really anything. What was going to happen at the royal court tomorrow will make his fire burn higher. And Chu-Ching-ju didn't look outside anymore. The wind blew past her veil, revealing a pale neck that was quickly hidden under the veil. She rubbed the edge of the teacup and remarked to the quiet Chu Yu-su, "San Mei's musical skills are better and better. De Jie is too complimentary." Chu Yu-su managed to smile. She knew that the other looked down at her, but she had to keep a respectful attitude, just practiced more during the days. Chu Qingju nodded. "You usually are much better than I as your Jie. De Jie's appearance is among the most beautiful of the country. How can Mimi compare?" Chu Yu-su stood and bowed, afraid to receive the compliment. It was just that something was off about the words she just spoke. Most beautiful of the country? Chu Qingju felt that she was saying she had looks but no education. But she didn't care. Others complimented her beauty. She felt happy. As to whether she had brains, it was fine as long as she was clear. What others said, did it mean anything? In this world, who wouldn't be spoken of, who wouldn't be the object of jealousy, wouldn't be called mediocre. She wasn't afraid of the malicious slander of others. Smiling carelessly, she put down the teacup in her hand. She suddenly observed, "There's less and less people on the shores." He-Yuan looked outside and saw that it was true there were less people. He remarked faintly, "It's late, let the boat near the shore." He didn't want to see Lao and his woman being sick. As beautiful as the fireworks were, there was a time where it had to stop. The people on the shores gradually left, and the busyness turned quiet. As the boat slowly reached the shore, Chu Qingju looked at the lanterns that were hanging by the shore without an audience. She remembered her own moon rabbit lantern that she had let a servant hold. Who's looking after the lantern? Chu Qingju allowed He-Hong to guide her down and asked about the whereabouts of the lantern. "Don't worry, Qian Changxian has somebody keeping a watch." He-Hong came down the last step. Seeing Chu Qingju still reluctant over that roughly crafted moon rabbit lantern, the smile on his face grew stronger. "There's many lanterns hanging in the Fu. After we return, I'll get someone to pick some pretty ones to hang in Zhangyuan." Chu Qingju nodded and held hands with He-Hong as they left the deck. She looked at the surroundings and found that a thin mist had formed, and it had gotten colder. Waiting at the side, Qian Changxian held the two's capes. He first helped Wang Yi put his own. When he was preparing to serve Chu Qingju, he was waved away by He-Hong, who personally did it. The soft shoe brocade cape was embroidered with faint flower patterns. Under the moon, it had a hazy beauty. Chu Qingju saw He-Hong put the cape on her and lowered her head to tie it, but found He-Hong had stolen ahead again. He-Hong's fingers had been carefully cut and cleaned. The joints were somewhat visible, giving off the feeling of security and strength. Chu Qingju smiled and raised her chin to allow He-Hong to tie her cape for her. Chu Yu-su silently stood in the corner. Nobody came up to serve her. No one even looked at her. She watched as Duan Wang lowered himself to tie Jie's cape for her, and suddenly felt ill and ironic. Nowadays, De Jie was high up in the sky, served and fawned over by countless people as Duan Wang Fei, and she had to use all her heart and mind to curry favor with Rui Wang. Even if she was successful, she could only be a seashore. Since it's late, Ji and Sa should return to rest early. He-Yuan saw He-Hong's actions and stopped. He continued, "I should return too." The two carriages had been waiting at one side to take their owners back to their Fu. He-Yuan finished speaking and headed to his own carriage. Behind him, Chu Yu-su hesitated and bowed to He-Hong and Chu Qingju. In the end, she still followed in He-Yuan's footsteps and got on the carriage of Rui Wang Fu. Chu Qingju watched as Rui Wang Fu's carried leave. The smile on her face had a hint of additional disdain. Rui Wang Yi has such an unrestrained temperament. Hearing this, He-Hong smiled. He's always been like this since he was young. Because of it, he's gotten into countless conflicts with De Ji. It's just Fu Huang has biasly favored him that after these years, he has gotten more and more of a personality. That He-Hong could say the words biasly favored It could be seen just how unfair Qing the Emperor was. And He Yuan has offended many. Rationally, an imperial son is favored by the emperor as much as he was. There should be many who followed him to earn a part in pushing him to the throne. But this Rui Wang really didn't have that many people following him. It could be seen that even the officials in the court felt that one day he would break himself. But it might be that Qing the Emperor preferred him this unruly. Maybe it allowed him to feel safer? Feeling that her thoughts were running off topic, Chu Qingju blew out a breath. I don't know why San Mei would follow Rui Wang. This is getting messy, eh? She couldn't discuss the imperial sons, so she could only shift the topic to Chang Digong Fu. Whatever they do, it has nothing to do with you. There's no need to worry yourself over these people. He Hung understood what He Yuan was planning. To how cheap He Yuan was, he looked down on it. He was going to take a woman of Chang Digong Fu and thought that was slapping him on the face, and for him to blame Qingju? He Hung thought to there and thought it was a bit funny. He wasn't a rash young boy. He wouldn't blame others for this occurrence. He Yuan was thinking of others like they were him. That really didn't fit him. When they returned to the Wang Fu, the night was already late. Early on, servants had hung lanterns in the Zhangyuan. Chu Qingju and He Hung washed before they slept. They were in a good mood thought, not being affected in the slightest by He Yuan. It was He Yuan that, upon returning to his Fu, threw a moderate fit. He didn't even pay attention to Qin Bailu's request for a meeting. He only ordered the servants to send Chu Yu Su back to Chang Digong Fu. When Qin Bailu heard that Wang Yi and Chu Sanxiaojia were together at the Lantern Festival, she almost smashed something in anger. At last, she could only push down the anger. Chang Digong Fu already had a Wang Fei come out of there. Why would they think to send the other daughter to be a seashore? Barely keeping a lid on her temper, Qin Bailu thought hatefully that no matter what, if this woman did enter the Fu, she wasn't going to go easy on her. On the second day after the Lantern Festival, a major event exploded at court. Before the imperial envoy sent to Jiangnan had reached their destination, they had been attacked by assassins. Cheng Wang had been wounded in the arm and gotten a high fever. The minister of the right, Wei Wenguang, was wounded even more serious and was still in a coma. Instantly, the entire court roared. Who would have such daring to assassinate imperial envoys? Did they want to silence them? Chapter 42 Assassination of the Imperial Envoy was a major event. Even though Qing the Emperor had a soft personality, but when he encountered such an event, he felt that he was personally humiliated and furiously ordered for an investigation. He Hung stood next to He Qi. Hearing He Qi's righteous and fervent words, as though he was really trying to help Fu Huang, his eyebrow moved slightly as he silently lowered his head. Since it is already done, then this event will be investigated by Ning Wang and the Ministry of Justice. Qing the Emperor's temper hasn't calmed and his voice was somewhat coarse. These criminals, they are too outrageous. Heir Chun accepts the order. He Qi knelt on one knee to receive the imperial decree, the lowered head disguising the satisfaction in his eyes. After court, He Qi didn't chat with others like he did usually but quickly left. He Hung looked at He Qi's rushing figure, a sliver of smile appearing on his face. Has His Highness Duan Wang ever heard of the story of the mantis and the cicada? The Minister of Defense, Luo Changqing, walked next to He Hong and bowed to him. He smiled as he looked at Ning Wang's back. The story is too common, but it does have some meaning. He Hong tilted his head slightly. He praised. Luo Duran is wise. What wise? It's just speaking nonsense. Luo Changqing rubbed his beard, the cheer still on his face. How is His Highness Cheng Wang's injuries as imperial subjects? All of us are very worried. Luo Duran doesn't have to worry. Ben Wang's SID was only wounded in the arm. The messenger said the injury was already controlled. He Hung put his hands behind his back, leading Luo Changqing by half a pace. Fu Huang has already sent the head and the professor of the Imperial Hospital to quickly travel there. That is good. As subjects, we won't have to worry any longer. Hearing the answer he wanted, Luo Changqing chuckled as he raised his hands together. Your Highness Duan Wang, this subject still has other matters and has to leave first. Farewell. Luo Duran, take care. He Hung smiled lightly and nodded at him. Walking as Luo Changqing walked away at a sedate pace, the smile slowly disappeared from He Heng's face. Luo Changqing, that wily fox, was worried about his grandson-in-law. He talked for this long period of time just to confirm He-Ming's condition. Thinking about the ploys that Lao Da and Lao San were playing behind their backs, He Hong curled his lips. No matter how loyal someone appeared, but at certain times they had to look out for themselves, just like the present Luo family. If He-Ming really had been mortally wounded, then that girl from the Luo family would become a widow. Most likely, the Luo family wouldn't let it go. Hearing what that old fox Luo Chongqing had said, he had probably guessed who had been the person that really sent the order. As to why the other would tell him, he didn't care. He was certain of at least one thing now, which was the Luo family had negative feelings towards Lao Da and Lao San. In Duan Wang Fu, Chu Qingju looked at the flower lanterns hanging in the courtyard and let the servants take them down. The flower lanterns might be pretty, but each night, someone had to light them. They also needed people to stand watch in case of a fire. It was too troublesome. She might enjoy the luxuries of life, but didn't want to trouble others for such a minor matter. More so, beautiful objects could only be looked at during special times to become even more beautiful. Wang Fei, Newbie heard that there was a fuss at Rue Wang Fu this morning. Rue Wang Fei was so angry she rode a carriage back to her maternal home. Jin Zhan walked behind Chu Qingju and gossiped in a low voice. Some people on the outside are spreading the news that Changde Gong Fu want to send San Xiaojia to Rue Wang Fu. She couldn't understand. San Xiaojia had the skills and the looks and was a D-daughter on top of that. Why would she want to be a seashore? The hand Chu Qingju reached with to hold a flower lantern paused and then, with waning enthusiasm, she took her hand back. She held the other's hand as she started to walk out of the courtyard. That year, Liang Shi used everything to try to get in through the main door of Changde Gong Fu. My good father didn't even wait for 100 days before welcoming her in. Everyone in this world has their own thoughts. The road they pick, we cannot interfere. But it's fine as long as they don't conflict with ours. Jin Zhan heard the absence of emotion in these words. She understood that Changde Gong Fu hadn't been good to Wang Fei. She, Yin Lu, and Yu Zhan had been inserted into the Gong Fu by Xiangqing Ho Fu to serve near Wang Fei. And Mu Jinjiejia had been taken into the Fu when Foreign had still been alive. After Wang Fei had been born, she had followed Wang Fei. Even though they had tried their best these years to protect Wang Fei still had to suffer indignities. Now that Wang Fei was cold to the people of the Gong Fu, it was almost expected. But Newbie is worried that if they did this, it would affect Wang Fei's reputation. Jin Zhan thought back to the things that the Gong Fu had done. Her face showed disgust as she frowned. It's so infuriating. What's infuriating? Chu Qingju smiled. This entire Jing city, who doesn't know that this Duan Wang Fei isn't on good terms with Changde Gong Fu and is enemies with the stepmother. Even more, in the Jing city circles, almost everyone assumed that I was raised by aunt. How Chu Yusu conducts herself, it would only reflect on Liang Shi. It wouldn't touch me. Jin Zhan instantly understood. After Wang Fei recovered, she distanced herself from Changde Gong Fu and became closer to Xiangqing Ho Fu. The incidents of the past had spread through Jing. She said with some joy, "Thank the heavens that these people can't affect Wang Fei." If Wang Yi blamed Wang Fei for these happenings, that would be a disaster. Chu Qingmu only laughed. There weren't that many lucky happenings and coincidences in this world. It was all made by people. Thinking about that family, her smile turned cold. And this world didn't have that many people that repaid grievances with a virtue. Coming out of the Zhangyuan, it was a green stone path. On the two sides of the path were bamboo forests that were hidden behind the fake mountains, creating a clean and elegant scene. After passing through a moon door, it led straight into the main garden of the Wang Fu. At the end of the right stone path, there was a small stream and a little bridge on top. When Chu Qingju had free time, she liked coming to the bridge to feed the fishes. That was more interesting than sitting in the halls and looking at the koi in the lotus pond. Randomly scattering the fish feed down, she watched as some goldfish carefully and quickly swallowed the food. She pointed at a nondescript black fish. This fish isn't as beautiful as the koi, but just swimming quietly next to the stones. If we don't pay attention, we can't even find it. Jin Zhan took a closer look and said uncertainly, "That one also seems to be a koi, but it's just so inconspicuous." Raising an eyebrow, she scattered another handful of fish feed. She saw the black koi was like a bolt of lightning, swallowing a series of pellets before swimming away. It was the epitome of fast and precise. Chu Qingju poured the rest of the fish feed into the water with some disinterest. She asked in boredom, "Which ones are going to the Princess Royal's food tomorrow?" Newbie isn't clear, but heard that the Princess Royal had invited many. Jianzhan thought for a while. Newbie heard that many young ladies not of age had also received invitations from the Princess Royal. Chu Qingju nodded and knew what the Princess Royal was doing. Rather than be heard over a man, why wouldn't she find people to amuse her? Women had to treat themselves. Did Chang Dagong Fu also receive one? Chu Qingju suddenly asked. If tomorrow both Chu Yusu and Qin Bailu came, she wondered with Qin Bailu's personality if something would happen. Jianzhan nodded. Chang Dagong Fu received an invitation. Chu Qingju rubbed her chin and observed. Then I have to be careful tomorrow and prevent myself from being pulled in. Just as she finished, she saw Huang Yang running quickly towards her and reporting that Jing Guifei had bestowed some gifts. What Jing Guifei had bestowed, the servants didn't have the qualifications to receive. Chu Qingju could only personally come to receive them. What surprised her was that Jing Guifei had let people send over a few palace flower and glass hair ornaments. These were finely crafted, and from a glance, it could be seen only those of high status could use them. Strangely, Chu Qingju felt that Jing Guifei was helping to prop her up. Tomorrow, there would be many womenfolk at the Princess Royal's foo. When there were many women gathered together, they naturally would like to compare clothing and jewelry. Jing Guifei was bestowing down objects from the palace. It at the very least sent a message that Jing Guifei, as her popo, was very satisfied with her, as the Urxi. She touched the palace flower. Chu Qingju's face revealed a smile. Maybe Jing Guifei wanted to tell the others that she, as her popo, wasn't unsatisfied at all because of what was happening with Chang Dagong Fu. What Jing Guifei had done was block the insults she might have gotten from the two Zholi tomorrow, and also told the women tomorrow that Jing Guifei was on her side. Even though the majority of the reason that Jing Guifei had made such a move was because of Duan Wang, Chu Qingju took this offering of goodwill. Because Jing Guifei had many ways to show her side, but chose the one that was most advantageous for her. Tomorrow, I'll be using this palace flower and this glass hairpin. Chu Qingju picked two and put them in a small sandalwood box. She gave it to Yuzhan, who usually made up her hair. Pieces from the palace, they should be more exquisite and rarer. The most important was that, to anyone with some skill and knowledge, they would know at a glance that these ornaments could only be used by those high up in the palace. Then there was no need to say where these objects came from. In Zhongjing Palace, Jing Guifei leaned on an armchair and said to Ding Mama, "The gifts went out. I hope Urxifu will understand." "Nyang, don't worry. Duan Wangfei is an intelligent person. She definitely will understand your efforts." Ding Mama passed her a cup of tea and carefully served as she praised. "Nyang is kind. Duan Wangfei will of course remember your good. It's not important if she remembers." Jing Guifei held her cup and thought about her Urxifu. She couldn't help but frown. Could intelligent be a description for that person? Bearing a tray of pastries, Wei Ranshuang quietly stood in her spot, a flicker of sadness and jealously passing through her eyes. Didn't they say that the relationship between a popo and the shifu was like the sky and the ground? Why was even Aunt worrying for Duan Wangfei now? Thinking about Duan Wangfei's conduct and manner of speech and what her aunt had once said to her, Wei Ranshuang gritted her teeth, but the plate she had been holding accidentally fell to the ground. Jing Guifei saw Wei Ranshuang standing at the doorway and set down the teacup in her hand. She said calmly, "Ranshuang, you have stayed for a long time in the palace. Your mother is probably missing you. Bengong will let someone send you back tomorrow." The phrase used here was, which is the question that led the answer which created the phrase. To repay grievances through virtue was thought by the scholars to be unusable, as if they replayed grievances with a virtue/boon. How would people repay a virtue? Therefore, the correct answer was to repay grievances justly and to repay a virtue with a virtue. Chapter 43. Wei Ranshuang sat inside a blue cloth-covered carriage, holding a bag in a daze. The shaking as the carriage moved forward did nothing to clear her head. After the carriage moved forward for a period of time, it suddenly stopped. She sat in a daze for a beat before asking, "What's happening?" "Gunyang, Duan Wang Fu's carriage is coming over. We have to clear the road." The person outside answered, "Duan Wang Fu?" Wei Ranshuang's expression changed, and she pushed aside the curtain covering the window. She saw up ahead that there were guards clearing the road, protecting an Ashtamangala carriage pulled by 4 horses. From a glance, it could be seen that it was a carriage specifically for Duan Wang Fu's womenfolk. Behind the large carriage, there were a few small yet finely made carriages. They most likely were used by the personal servant girls of Duan Wang Fei. Wei Ranshuang bit her lower lip, her heart uncomfortable. Even Duan Wang Fei's personal attendants were riding in a carriage that was better than the one she had. She let the curtain down. As she listened to the people outside use astonished and admiring voices to talk about Duan Wang Fu's carriage, her stare gradually became resolute. After Duan Wang Fei's procession had passed, the green cloth-covered carriage that Wei Ranshuang sat in started to sway as it made its way forward again. When she came out of the carriage, Wei Ranshuang looked at the relatively bare door of her family's fu. There weren't any sedans. She held her Yahuan's hand as she walked in. Her family home was just this big. There were no high-ranking officials and basically no space to stand on protocol. Wei Qinshi saw her daughter return and a crowd of people carrying gifts. She smiled and remarked, "You seem heavier." Guifei Nyang is very good at raising people. Wei Ranshuang forced a smile and let her mother put away the objects that Jing Guifei had bestowed down. Then she said, "Aunt said you probably were missing me, so she let me return." Hearing this, Wei Qinshi's face slightly changed. After she motioned for the others in the room to leave, she said with some worry, "Did Guifei Nyang not like you?" Wei Ranshuang shook her head, her voice carrying full of distress. Guifei Nyang said Duan Wang Fei was very good. What does that mean? Does she spurn you to become her son Si Shi? Wei Qinshi's voice was full of indignation as she ranted. She's our Wei family's daughter. Now that she's become Guifei Nyang, has she forgotten her maternal family? No matter what, her father-in-law and Jing Guifei's father had been full brothers. Now that their branch was declining, Jing Guifei hadn't done anything to help and even looked down on her daughter. It was somewhat upsetting. But remembering that her own husband was only a minor 5th-grade provincial governor before transferring back to Jing, and that both husband and her children needed to rely on Jing Guifei in the future, she could only suppress her dissatisfaction inside. Nyang has bestowed down so many things, it can be seen she is still looking after you. As to Duan Wang, I'll try to think of a way for you. Wei Ranshuang's face reddened and she whispered, "His Highness Duan Wang is a good person." Wei Qinshi looked at her daughter's bashful expression and decided to meet that Duan Wang Fei before making a decision. Her maternal father and brothers might not have great abilities, but they were a branch of the Qin clan, and could find someone who could speak out. If her daughter went into Duan Wang Fu, it was a good road. At least there still was Jing Guifei Nyang, so Duan Wang Fei wouldn't harshly treat her daughter. Duan Wang and her daughter also were cousins and would care a bit more based on the relationship. Going into the Wang Fu, it was better than marrying a minor official who was never going to come into the light. The Princess Royal's Fu at this time was full of noise, clothing, and music flying everywhere. When Chu Qingju walked into the Huyan, she found that if it wasn't that these people were wearing medieval clothing, she thought she was at one of the modern parties. When she came in, instantly a formally dressed mama carefully ushered her into a pavilion. She saw Wei Qingyi sitting down next to a grandly dressed woman. That person was most likely Jean and Princess. She cheerfully came and performed an elegant bow. "So this must be Jiejia. Nice to meet you, Jiejia." Jean and Princess stood and held her hand, returning the same greeting. Daimei, don't be so still. I called everyone here just for relaxing and having fun, not to be so courteous." Finishing, she pulled her to sit down beside herself and let the servants serve tea. Chu Qingju smiled and replied, "That's great. I'm so tired of the rules every day." Finishing, she looked at the surroundings. "Where's nephew and niece?" "I got the 2 of them to go play with the little guests from the other families." Jean and Princess waved her hand. "Big people and little people can't play together. They don't come and disturb us. Isn't this nice?" Chu Qingju smiled but didn't respond. Even though young children were noise, but as an aunt, she could only hear this but not agree. Which child isn't loud? Wei Qingyi responded. She herself had a son. When she talked about children, she always had enthusiasm. It's good for children to run around and be loud. Their bodies become stronger. Jean and Princess nodded. That's so true. It's so hard for a woman to raise a child. Finishing, she smiled at Chu Qingju. Daimei doesn't have children now. You still have some relaxing days. Chu Qingju smiled as she took a drink of tea. It's nice too to have children around. She detected the friendliness barely noticeable in Jean and Princess. If it was any other person, at this time they would ask when she was having a child, but Jean and Princess made it seem like a joke. Looking at the noise in other families, I find it much harder to care for a child than looking. Jean and Princess had no desire to keep discussing children and turned to say, when Ji and Daimei married, I wasn't in Jing and didn't have the luck to meet you. Today, I have to say that my Didi is very lucky to marry such a good person. It's an event of great fortune. Trying hard to let herself reveal a bashful expression, Chu Qingju lowered her head. Jean and Princess saw Chu Qingju's red cheeks and knew she was embarrassed. She smiled and teased. I forgot you're newly married. You're embarrassed now. When she first saw the other, she had felt she was eye-catching. But this bashful young girl in front of her made her agree with the Empress's words. This Duan Wangfei was very suited to her Di. Wei Qingyi saw that Jean and Princess Royal had the desire to be close with Chu Qingju and looked at Chu Qingju in surprise. Today, her Daimei was still dressed vibrantly. That already beautiful face, if it was a 9 before, today it was a 10. She knew very clearly how men liked this type of beautiful woman, but she was even clearer of the fact that, just based on a face, a woman couldn't keep a man. Princess, Rui Wangfei has arrived. Jean and Princess heard the servant's report and the smile on her face dimmed. But if one didn't look closely, they wouldn't have seen it. Quickly welcomed them in. She had never interacted closely with Rui Wang, but the arrogant conduct of Rui Wang had passed into her ears a long time ago. As a married princess, she never commented on these kinds of matters, but she didn't like Rui Wang and his family. A man with this personality, if he succeeded, then all of his siblings won't have easy lives. Qin Bailu's mood wasn't very bright, but the usual smile on her face didn't dim. She walked into the pavilion and after exchanging bows with Jean and Princess, she sat down next to Chu Qingju. Sitting closely together, Chu Qingju found her face seemed slightly swollen. Qin Bailu had applied heavier makeup today and seemed more mature. Wei Qingyi held a teacup and blew on the tea leaves on the surface. She slowly took a drink before smiling at Qin Bailu, remarking, Sandaimei is a bit late today. When I came out today, I met some matters. Sorry, did Jie and the two Saw, for waiting. Qin Bailu forced out some mirth, the hand holding the teacup tightening. It was Daimei's fault. Your Dasa is joking with you, you aren't late. Jean and Princess saw that something wasn't right from her appearance and her voice softened. Since you have all arrived and come with me to chat with the others. After so many years, I'm not familiar anymore with Jing's womenfolk. Since the sister-in-law asked, the three daimei naturally stood and accompanied Jean and to converse with the women. The three sat at the front with Jean and Princess and found that many young girls were sitting in the garden. They didn't know why Jean and Princess had done such a thing and smiled without speaking. Chu Qingju found Liang Shi was in the gardens as well with Chu Yusu and Chu Huishui. She tilted her head to look at Qin Bailu. As expected, her face had become darker. Watching the scene, she couldn't help but sigh. Liang Shi was in too much of a rush and too short-sighted. She knew that Rui Wangfei was coming today. Why did she come? Did she think that Jean and Princess would favor Chu Yusu? Today, so many lovable guests have come. Bin Gong likes having a good time. Why don't these lovable guests look at some paintings and compose a few poems to widen our scope? Jean and Princess' tone was a consulting one, but when her words landed, people appeared with drawings and brush and ink to show off in front of the princess and the Wang Fei. Many were very willing. So these young girls started to examine the drawings and compose a good poem. Chu Qingju saw the excited young girls and, in a flash, felt that Jean and Princess was amusing herself. These young girls didn't have many important connections to her, and having some fun was a good thing. These people were appreciating drawings. Chu Qingju and the others naturally wouldn't partake in the activity, and so they chatted as they drank tea. I heard that the lanterns a few nights ago at the Lantern Festival were very beautiful. It was a pity I didn't have the time, otherwise I would have gone to see. Ning Wang Fei Wei Qingyi's voice held regret. The lanterns in the Fu might be beautiful, but they don't have the same flavor. Chu Qingju saw that Qin Bailu's face became even uglier. Daimai, did you go? Wei Qingyi pushed the topic onto Chu Qingju's head. By now, who didn't know that Duan Wang had taken Duan Wang Fei out to see the flower lanterns and onto Rui Wang's boat to see the fireworks? Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow. Wei Qingyi was asking this just to instigate a conflict between her and Qin Bailu. That was because Chu Yusu was like her. They were all named Chu. At the same time in Duan Wang Fu, He Hung heard expected news. Lao San is taking the Duke of Changda's third daughter as Si Fei? He Hung repeated with a calm face as he looked at Wang Changming. You are sure? Rui Wang Fu has already sent the letter and the gifts to Changda Gong Fu. It's very likely, Wang Changming said, but it's unknown if Changda Gong Fu will accept. Wang Changmin didn't dare to mention Wang Fei, so he only said, Dai Duo has also passed along information. Rui Wangyi is very angry at the attempted assassination of the imperial envoy. He is suspicious it was Ning Wang that purposefully framed him. He Hung lowered his head, putting down the carved root. He tapped the bottom of the root. Let him have his tantrum. It could be seen at the bottom of the carved root. There was a hollow building. It looked beautiful, but in reality, it wasn't strong. Chapter 44. Pointing at the mulberry tree and swearing at the locust tree, females tended to prefer subtle and graceful poems. Chu Qingju took the poems that Wei Qingyi passed over. She casually took a look and saw characters for light wind, wispy smoke and others along those lines. She carelessly flipped through before handing them to Qin Bailu on her other side. I feel all of these Gunyang have literary skill, but I am not skilled poetically. Sandaimai, have a look instead. Qin Bailu took these poems that had been picked out by Jin and Princess. The one on top was the work of the third Gunyang of Changda Gong Fu. A hint of ice appeared at the corner of her lips. She flipped through and said to Chu Qingju, Saw comes from a noble family. Even your Fu's Sangunyang is this talented. Why should you underestimate yourself? These words were somewhat harsh. Even though Rui Wang had the emperor's favor, he was still an younger brother. You, as a D-Mei, talking in this type of tone to your Saw, it was not having any respect. How was it that the family Qing was an educated and literary family, yet produce a woman of such conduct? Jin and Princess' eyes jumped. She glanced at Qin Bailu before lowered her head to drink tea. My Fu. Chu Qingju giggled as she took out a handkerchief to wipe her mouth. Her voice was gentle as she lectured. Sandime, it's not that Saw likes lecturing others, but your words are too improper. Us women, when we marry, we follow our husbands. My Fu is Wang Ye's Fu. Sandaimai, are you saying that I am not a member of the imperial family? This kind of words, even the empress couldn't say them, to say nothing of Qin Bailu as a daimai. Qin Bailu finished listening to the speech, and in her heart, she hated Chu Qingju for not leaving her a shred of dignity. On the outside, she could only smile and apologize. Saw, forgive me. It's just my mouth got away from me. Saw, please forgive me. Finishing, she stood to give a bow. Chu Qingju didn't stand to return the bow but nodded instead. Mimi doesn't have to be so courteous. There isn't that many protocols between us, Jolie, but today, I had to say a word. Now, I am Duan Wang Fei. My mother is Chu Tianshi. Daimai, you can't get mixed up in the future. The smile on Qin Bailu's face almost froze. She hadn't expected Chu Qingju to straightforwardly throw the Duke of Changda aside. Thinking about the rumors involving Changda Gong Fu and Duan Wang Fei, that the Duke of Changda was a dissolute person. Not yet 100 days after his wife had died, he married a wife. That Chu Liangshi was not a loving mother and harshly treated the daughter of the previous wife, and didn't even care for the Shu daughters, only being caring to her own daughter and her maternal family. No wonder that everywhere in these past days were the previous scandals of Changda Gong Fu. It was waiting here. Chu Qingju wanted to clearly express her attitude towards Changde Gongfu. Many people had come today, and in front of all these people, Qin Bailu couldn't throw a tantrum despite the great humiliation she endured. She could only sit with her suppressed rage. She handed the poems in her hand back to Jean and Princess. Which one does Princess think is the best? Chu Qingju looked at her anger simmering under the surface and thought uncharitably that Rui Wang and his wife were naturally a couple. Their way of speech was not well thought out and insulting. Their arrogant conduct was just asking for retaliation. Bin Gong feels that the young ladies Chu and Lu are both good. Jin and Princess raised her head. Who are these two Gunyang? Come up to let Bin Gong see. Chu Qingju looked at the Gunyang that came up to bow. Chu Yusu was warm and beautiful to the eye. The Lu family's Gunyang was thin and graceful. She was truly someone that would catch someone's eye. If she didn't guess wrong, this family Lu's Gunyang should be the great scholar Lu Jinghong's daughter, Yurong. Bin Gong sees you two's poems both have their own merits. They say there is never just one winner in the arts. Why don't you both be the winners? Jean and Princess had heard of the event between Chu Yusu and Rui Wang. She gave Chu Yusu an extra look. This woman did have the looks of a spring flower, her brows like a painting. At this time, she couldn't help but look at Duan Wang Fei as she smiled faintly and tasted the tea. The two were sisters of the same father, but their appearances and aura were completely different. Chu Yusu was very beautiful, but it wasn't a rare kind of beauty. But while Duan Wang Fei's appearance wasn't peerless, it just made people feel she was unspeakably beautiful, each move and word carrying the flavor of beauty. This probably was each person's charisma. Jean and Princess let the servants present a set of precious ink and hair ornament to Chu and Lu before giving a few more compliments and letting the two sit down. She didn't even mention once the relation between Chu Yusu and Chu Qingju. Very quickly there were servants that presented fresh cakes and fruits. Everyone saw that these were all good things, and it could be seen how much the emperor favored Jean and Princess. No wonder the Wang Feis were all this harmoniously interacting with Jean and Princess. Even a person as proud as Rui Wang Fu was courteous. From beginning to end, Wei Qingyi, who hadn't spoken more than a few words, felt that Chu Qingju's fate seemed to naturally conflict with Qin Bailu. And each time, it was Chu Qingju who won. Chu Qingju dared to humiliate Qin Baisu. She must be relying on the favor that Duan Wang held for her. Otherwise, why would she speak without regard for the consequences? She thought in derision. When Duan Wang didn't favor her, how would she live? If she had offended the Zholi underneath her, who would pity her in the future? If it was her, she would have said it more beautifully, at least. She wouldn't have made it so the person had no dignity left. She sighed and raised a teacup to disguise her emotions. Sometimes, only the cruel reality could make women learn and grow. We are pretty done with the drawings. If everyone doesn't dislike it, why don't you come with Bin Gong to hear some music? Jean and Princess held a Yahuan's hand as she stood. Once she spoke, everyone all agreed and said they had no dislike. The stage had already been set up. After everyone sat down, the actors started singing. The meaning, broadly said, was a heartless man and a girl in love. In the end, the woman grew old and left before the man regretted his actions and repented. Chu Qingju saw this kind of plot and felt uncomfortable. Why was it that the woman had to stay at home to care for the elders, raise the children while the man could drink and be merry outside? When the woman was old and her youth was gone, the man would have been bored of playing outside and wanted to return home. Why was it that the man was considered to be so valuable and admirable when he repented? Who saw the youth of the woman, the blood and tears of the woman, when she was old and couldn't enjoy the beautiful times of youth anymore? What was the use in the man repenting? According to her, these plays had been written by vulgar scholars to satisfy their own desires. They always wanted their own wives to be virtuous and taciturn, and hoped that other people's wives were extremely lusty. In reality, they would never be able to find a wife. The only thing they could do was eat one meal before looking for the next, squatting in old and drafty cottages, fantasizing that a landlord's daughter or a noble daughter will wanted to marry them. Mu Jin saw her mistress' face wasn't well and changed a cup of hot tea for her. She asked in a small voice, "Mistress, is your body not well?" Chu Qingju held the teacup as she faintly replied, "It's fine." I just don't want to see this kind of man have such a virtuous and generous woman. She had been talking in a small voice, but Jean and Princess had heard. Jean and Princess nodded and laughed icily. That's so true. This type of man still managed to live out his days with his family. It's so disgusting. Get the singers to leave. Ben Gong doesn't like this play. The actors quickly retreated, not understanding how they had provoked Her Highness the Princess into such anger. A few days earlier, I heard a repeat of The Record of Panjie 1. It's somewhat interesting. Does Jejia want to hear? Chu Qingju gave a faint smile and commented, the men and women in this world, they have to respect that karma will happen by the end. How can someone take advantage all the time? Jean and Princess felt that Duan Wangfei was becoming more and more pleasing to look at. She picked The Record of Panjie before she said to Chu Qingju, Daimei, your words are good. I think the same. This Jean and Princess really did have some temper. Chu Qingju smiled as she raised the teacup. Your Highness is wise. Qin Bailu stared coldly as Chu Qingju and Jean and Princess talked. She turned her head to glare icily at Chu Yu, Su who sat in the corner. The women of the family Chu were all fox spirits disguised in those long sleeves which danced beautifully. The Jejia was a temptress. The Mimi did what fox spirits always did. None of them were good. The Record of Panjie was the story of a grassroots Zuikai who fell in love with a noble Xiaojia and tried different ways to win the good feelings of the Xiaojia. But this Zuikai had a childhood sweetheart who was his fiancée. The Zuikai wanted it all, so he concealed the information. In the end, what he had done had been found out by both the Xiaojia and the childhood sweetheart. He was rejected by both people and was in poverty for his entire life. The one he wanted to climb up to was the noble Xiaojia. The one he wanted to break off was the childhood sweetheart. In the end, he didn't climb up or break anything off. This was the biggest insult to the poor scholar's greediness. When this play came out, no one had originally recommended it. Which man would like to watch such a play? And the women who were enclosed in their inner chambers naturally didn't know there was this kind of a play. So when this play was acted out, many were deeply attracted. After the play finished, the crowd started discussing, this saying how shameless the scholar was, that saying that what the Xiaojia and the sweetheart done was right. It's true that the scholar is deserving of hatred, but this noble Xiaojia should have secretly met with the scholar before. She nearly ruined her reputation. Qin Bailu pointed out with a mirthless smile, this world still lives by the decisions of the mother and father. Such a good girl, it's not a good thing to mix with adult men. These words had an indirect target. Many people present had heard what occurred at the Lantern Festival, and so no one continued the topic. That was a matter of Rui Wangfu. Rui Wang's personality had always been proud. It was better not to provoke him. Liang Shi heard Qin Bailu's speech, and her face changed. However, Chu Yusu, standing by her side, didn't change her expression as she kept a smile on her face. It was as though the target that Qin Baishang's, pointing at the mulberry tree and swearing at the locust tree, wasn't her. Wei Qingyi and Chu Qingju both smiled and didn't speak. They seemed to have not heard Qin Bailu's words. The two exchanged a glance, raised the teacup in their hand, and simultaneously took a drink. Luckily, this noble Xiaojia didn't make a great mistake. To know she had stepped wrong and return rather than continue onwards, it is a good thing. Jean and Princess's words broke the tense silence. A sharp smile appeared on her face. This kind of man, you can't tolerate or spoil him. Otherwise, he'll forget who he really is. Once the words came out, everyone's inside was full of different flavors. In this world, what man didn't steal some? What man didn't like beauty? Chu Qingju looked at Jean and Princess. On her face, she saw what looked like a certain type of resolution. A1 is to climb. To claim connections of higher status is break, twist, snap, suffer loss. Chapter 45. High up above, after watching 2 plays, it was already past 1, and Jean and Princess invited everyone to a meal. She let the Gunyang who hadn't come of age to gather and freely chat. She and the noble ladies and officials' wives that married chatted about the interesting things in Jing. Chu Qingju heard these people once again mention the spiritual master Xianling on the 5 Estates Monastery. It looked like this spiritual master Xianling had some skill. regardless of whether there were ghosts and gods in this world. But the fact that a person could be recommended by so many women used to living in a complicated environment, it showed his abilities were exceptional. As to in which direction they laid, that depended on the person. When Jean and Princess heard this, she was unexpectedly calm. She smiled calmly. If he is an extraordinary person, there definitely will be a change to meet him in the future. She did say that, but Chu Qingju could see that she didn't even care about such a thing. Chu Qingju held Mu Jin's hand as she stood to change clothes. On her way back, she met Chu Yusu accompanied by her Yahuan. She stopped in her steps and calmly watched as Chu Yusu gave her a full and respectful greeting. Greetings to Duan Wang Fei. Yusu was now very clear. The Dejie in front of her didn't want to interact with Chang de Gong Fu at all. She could even see on Dejie's body the coldness she held towards Chang de Gong Fu. She had heard many of the rumors on the outside. She wanted to argue but found all the rumors were true, and some events that occurred were even worse than the rumors. She didn't have the courage to use the appellation of Dejie. The reputation of the Fu was worse and worse. It had affected her and Jie's marriage prospects. She wasn't content with becoming the foreign of a normal official, but none of the D sons of the noble families wanted to marry her. So she wanted to try her best using her talents and beauty. It was better than mediocrely finishing her life. San Xiaojie, please rise. Mu Jin saw her Wang Fei stand still and came up a step to give insubstantial support. She once again moved behind Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju looked at the color of the sky. Why are you alone here? I just saw the Gunyang of the Tao and Lu families chatting together. Why don't you go play with them? Chu Yusu's face was somewhat ugly. She forced a smile and answered, just wanted to take a walk. Nodding, Chu Qingju didn't speak more. I'll go first, you be careful. Farewell, Wang Fei. Chu Yusu bowed again. She looked at Chu Qingju surrounded by quite a few Yahuan as they ushered her towards Jean and Princess. She bit the corner of her lip to push down the soreness in her heart. By now, those noble girls weren't willing to interact with her. They thought they were so high up, not willing to interact with her as someone willing to become a chia. Really, they were normal people as well. In the future, they also had to pour their heart to try to hold their husband's heart and still manage the favored seashore. By that time, they would all be that common eye of the fish. This kind of thoughts might just be Chu Yusu comforting herself, but by now, she could only think like so to keep that strange sense of jealousy she had towards Chu Qingju. She shouldn't fantasize that if the person decreed would have been her, the person respected and flattered would be her. Wei Qingyi and the others saw Chu Qingju return and teased. You finally came back. We just mentioned you. Mentioned me? Chu Qingju sat back on her original seat, picking up an already skinned tangerine to put into her mouth. Said you have good fortune. All the seashore and the Fu are so obedient, and doesn't have too many tricks. Wei Qingyi smiled. Not like our Fu, there's many beauties. Chu Qingju gave a cough and swallowed down the tangerine. She wiped the corner of her mouth. Dasa is joking. Just recently, a Si Fei on Duan Wang Fu had been demoted to Chia, and then a certain Tong Fong had died due to illness. Before that, there was a Tong Fong married off to the estate. This was being called obedience. Was this Wei Qingyi purposefully shaming her? I'm not as virtuous as Dasa and can't run a household so well. Dasa, don't laugh at me. Chu Qingju knew the only people present who dared to discuss Duan Wang Fu was the three of Jean and Princess, Wei and Qin. She smiled at Jean and Princess and informed, Jejia, you may not know, Dasa is virtuous and able, but she always compliments those that are not, like me. Jejia, you have to help get justice for me. All right, Ben Gong's brothers could marry you all to be Wang Fei. It's their good luck. Jean and Princess smiled as she placed a place of red date cake into the middle. All of you eat a bit more cake, and don't mutually compliment each other anymore. Wei Qingyi smiled and let the topic go. She knew that Duan Wang Fu was controlled now by Chu Qingju. The Hoyuan was like a steel box. A few days ago, Wang Yi had a dark expression on his face because of a certain Tong Fong's death. That Tong Fong must have been Wang Ye's person. The people accompanying them were foreign that were of some status. It was a pity that Chu Qingju's aunt, Tian Luosher, wasn't here. Otherwise, Chu Qingju wouldn't feel so bored. Jean and Princess holding a picture-admiring banquet today. It was to let these foreign knew that she, Jean and Princess, was going to put roots down in Jing. At the same time, it was letting them go home to tell their husbands she was going to sort out her Fuma, the Count of Beilu. These people should widen their eyes and don't involve themselves. This tactic had the flavor of pressuring people through privilege. But who was it that let her be the Princess Royal as personally decreed by the Emperor? It wasn't as though there weren't other princesses in the Dailong dynasty, but she was the only Princess Royal. This was enough to prove her position. Chu Qingju felt that Jean and Princess was a smart and realistic woman. She had a privileged identity. She didn't have to embarrass herself for that supposed feelings. She had given birth to son and daughter for the Count of Beilu. Rationally, the Count of Beilu shouldn't be able to have a Chia, but the Count of Beilu did such a thing. This didn't just humiliate Jean and Princess, it was humiliating the imperial family. If today, Jean and Princess allowed such a thing to occur, then in the future, other Princess Fuma will follow in doing so. One leads to the next. At the end, the most tragic would be the women. After the banquet finished, Chu Qingju came out of the Princess Fu and saw Liang Shi and Chu Yusu at the main gate. Towering above them was Qin Bailu. She didn't stop her steps, passing through the three of them to enter her carriage. Others were willing to act out a drama. She didn't want any drama. The carriage started moving. Chu Qingju looked through the window and managed to see Qin Bailu show a disdainful smile at Liang Shi and Chu Yusu. Liang Shi's face was full of rage that didn't dare erupt. She curled her lips and let go of the curtain. Returning to Duan Wang Fu, Chu Qingju saw Shu Kuei and Rui Xiang standing guard outside the gate to the Zhengyuan. She knew that it was possible that He Hung was inside, so she asked, "Is Wang Yi inside the room?" Shi Kuei bent and answered, "Wang Fei." Wang Yi had come for a while. Nodding to show she knew, Chu Qingju passed through the main gate and crossed the garden of the Zhengyuan. When she came to the outer room of the suite, she saw He Hung was looking at the beauty dancing under the moon that she had the servants hang up on the wall. "Wang Yi?" Chu Qingju smiled and walked next to He Hung. She stood abreast with him. "What's wrong with the painting?" "I remember. You also have such a long dress." He Hung kept on feeling that there was a shadow of Chu Qingju in this painting. "How come Wang Yi didn't think that this painting is me?" Chu Qingju laughed. He Hung looked at the signature of the scroll. It was actually Chu Qingju's work. The time of the painting was just a few days ago. No wonder he hadn't seen it yesterday. It must have been that someone hung it up today. Qingju knows how to dance? He Hung was shocked. There were many noble girls that studied the Qin, Qi, literature and art, but there was not even a few that learned how to dance. "Learn myself." Chu Qingju raised an eyebrow, as though she was proud yet helpless. In the past, there wasn't anything to do. In the room by myself, I wanted to spend away the time, so I studied from the books. He Hung knew that Chu Liangshi hadn't been good to Chu Qingju, and had expected that she wouldn't have spent any thought on letting Chu Qingju learn the things that proper women should know. He saw her smile was both proud and helpless. He smiled and asked, "When will I have the luck to see?" Chu Qingju raised her smooth and beautiful chin like a proud empress. "When Wang Yi does something that makes Chia happy, Chia will consider this matter." Clearly calling herself Chia, but He Hung heard a hint of pride. But he still felt that the other's state was so ticklish to his heart. He couldn't resist reaching with a hand to touch Chu Qingju's waist. Qingju's waist is thin and flexible. It should make for an extremely beautiful dance. The corners of Chu Qingju's mouth drew back. "Wang Yi, are you mocking me for being a dancer girl?" He Hung seemed to understand why women always made trouble without a reason, but strangely felt the need to explain himself. He helplessly drew the person into his embrace. "Those women aren't worthy of being mentioned together with Qingju. You only dance for me, no one else will see. This is between us as husband and wife. I like it, I'm not teasing you." Finishing, he added another sentence, "In the future, when I make you happy, you have to lower yourself to dance once for me." Chu Qingju gave a gentle snort. "Since you are so expectant, when the spring comes, I will dance one for you to watch." This body was truly flexible. When it danced, it wouldn't seem hard and without grace. But she wasn't really wanting to dance for He Hung like this. Men were a strange type of creature. They liked playing with willing women, but they looked down at a woman for being too willing. From a certain viewpoint, Men were even more conflicted than women at times. But if she made such a matter a delight between the two of them, to let the other feel expectant, but not let the other easily see, then it will let He Hang's heart give birth to a feeling of intimacy akin to a secret belonged to the two of them. Sometimes, a beautiful secret was useful in closing the distance between man and woman. He Hung saw Chu Qingju's pouty state and felt the cat in his heart was tickling him even more. He breathed in the smell of her hair and said in a hoarse voice, "All right." There was clearly layers of clothing separating them, but he seemed to be able to feel the fineness under the clothing. He couldn't resist carrying the person to bed. Chu Qingju didn't want to play the game of being on top of the other before eating. She leaned her head to He Hang's chest as she said, "I saw that Jean and Princess Royal seems to want to separate from Count of Beilu." A second of silence. She then heard He Hang's voice full of disdain with a hint of anger. Separation is necessary. How could he slight an imperial princess? This matter, it won't end so easily. Chu Qingju gave a smile of unclear meaning. Look, this was the people of the imperial house. No matter how arrogant, warm, or honest they were usually, in their bones, the high attitude naturally existed. Chapter 46 Kuei-Yuan Palace. The Count of Beilu managed to travel to Jing City on the 26th day of the first month. The first place he went to was the Princess Royal's Fu, but before he could enter, he was thrown out by the servants of the Fu. He hadn't known that the servants would make things this difficult for him. When he was about to start in on them, Jean and Princess came out, supported by a Yahuan. Because the Count of Beilu had constantly been thinking of that mistress, the husband and wife hadn't been together for many days in the recent months. The Count of Beilu stood under the main gate, looking at the grandly dressed princess. The fiery anger instantly was extinguished by cold water. He muttered, "Princess, what is Fuma doing?" Jean and Princess looked mockingly behind him. "Why don't I see your little lover?" The Count of Beilu's face was conflicted. The servants and guards of the Princess Fu had filled the gate. He didn't want to humiliate himself in front of these people, but he had to do so. Otherwise, his entire Chao family would be impacted, to say nothing of protecting the mistress he liked. The princess misunderstood. It was just a little bit of fun. It wouldn't have influenced the feelings between us. Count of Beilu forced himself to smile as he gave a deep bow. "I ask for Princess to forgive Weifu. Weifu will not do such an idiotic thing in the future." Jean and Princess disdainfully looked at the man in front of his eyes. He still was elegant and graceful, full of warmth and education. The person was still the same person, but the heart had changed. A man with a changed heart. If she kept it, it was just guarding a stinky skin. She would just disgust herself. For some reason, she wanted to laugh and she did. "Fuma, this joke is really funny." Ben Gong, in the past, hadn't known that Fuma would have lost himself because of playing with an amusement. Idiotic or not, you know in your heart. These kinds of words, Ben Gong doesn't care to hear. Since it was Fu Huang's imperial decree that summoned you into Jing, you can go into the palace to explain to Fu Huang. The Count of Beilu's heart suddenly panicked. He heard the disdain in the princess' words. But if this event didn't have the princess to mediate, the emperor will definitely heavily punish him. And the family Chao would be over. Originally, his family Chao had been one with only a title yet no power. Now that the incident has gotten larger, they might not even be able to keep their title. Thinking about this, the Count of Beilu could only continue. "Princess, we have been together for so many years, we can't let such a minor thing affect our feelings for each other." This event, it was Weifu's great mistake. As long as Princess is willing to forgive Weifu, Weifu is willing to do anything. Since you know we have been married for so long, why did you do such a shameless thing to break our union? Jean and Princess wasn't moved and looked expressionlessly at the Count of Beilu. In this world, there is a reason for anything. These years, Ben Gong has never slighted any of your Chao family. You have treated me so. How can you come here? Finishing, she turned and ordered the gatesmen. "Close the main gate." The Count of Beilu watched as the main gate slowly closed. He wanted to beg, but seeing Jean and Princess gaze, he couldn't say one word. Because the other's eyes told him, no matter what he said, the other wouldn't change their heart. The news that the Count of Beilu had begged to see the princess but was rejected quickly spread through Jing. Many said that the Count of Beilu was too reckless, and there were those that said the Count of Beilu wasn't smart enough, but no one dared to say that Jin and Princess Royal was too aggressive. It wasn't easy marrying a daughter of the imperial family. When Chu Qingju heard of the incident, she let people find out more to tell her. In the deep courtyard, there really wasn't anything. If she didn't listen to what was happening outside to amuse herself, she didn't know how to spend her time. No wonder the women here put on big or small banquets, looked at flowers, tea, paintings when they had time. All these were just excuses for the noblewomen to gather and waste time. The night that this news had spread, the Fu received the Empress decree. It said they were having a family banquet at Kuei Yuan Palace tomorrow, and that He Hung and Chu Qingju both had to be there. After receiving the decree, Chu Qingju felt a bit surprised. The Empress didn't seem to be one that meddled. To hold a family banquet so unexpectedly, it was most likely for Jean and Princess Matter. He Hung saw Chu Qingju in deep thought, so he spoke. You don't have to think too much. Tomorrow, other than us brothers, I'm afraid there will only be Zhang Jiejin, Fu Huang, and Mu Hu. This was saying that the other consorts didn't have the qualifications to be there? Chu Qingju understood. This was the warm-up to sorting out the Count of Beilu. She nodded. Yes, it should be us maternal family who sort out this heartless man. To put aside such a good wife and entangle himself with an unclear woman, we can't let him off easily. Detecting Chu Qingju's anger, He Hung smiled and stated, It seems you had a good time with Zhang Jie. Chu Qingju sat down on the carved chair. She sighed and observed, Zhang Jie is a good woman. The Count of Beilu is truly despicable. He clearly had a very good person at home, but he had to go out to touch the unclean and unknown ones. It can be seen that the feelings from these many years, to him, it wasn't important. Seeing her expression seem tired, he didn't know how he just started speaking. There are millions of men in the world. Some don't care for old affections, other people deepen their affections over time. Zhang Jie just met a bad man. Chu Qingju suddenly smiled. Her left hand propped up her chin. She tilted her head to He Hung and said, Wang Yi has to be the person whose affections deepen over time. He Hung's gaze was dark. He answered hoarsely, Naturally, I'm the kind of person whose affections deepen over time. But in this sentence, he put emphasis on a certain word. A man and woman alone. He Hung's purposeful flirtation aroused Chu Qingju's interest. They didn't know who moved first, but when Chu Qingju managed to react, she was already lying on the bed, revealing half a shoulder. He Hung's dog teeth were licking and biting at her shoulder. Feeling her shoulder tickle, Chu Qingju shrugged her shoulders and laughed out loud. This provoked He Hung to bite tighter. He said hoarsely, It seems I didn't put in enough effort. That Qingju can still laugh. Finishing, he purposefully pinched at her waist, causing Chu Qingju to laugh even louder. He clearly knew that she was most ticklish at her waist, yet he still purposefully put his hand there. Chu Qingju flashed to deliberately hide in his embrace, and before he noticed, she took grasp of little Hung. She threatened, Wang Yi, don't tickle me. It wouldn't be good if I accidentally move my hand. He Hung gave a deep laugh. He replied, Wang Fei, are you threatening me? Finishing, his body pushed down, pinning the person under his body. He gently kissed her ear before raising his head to look at her and saying, Then you have to take good care of it. What is taking good care of it? Chu Qingju widened her eyes, looking innocently at He Hung. Her hand very carelessly trembled a few times and felt little Hung stand to attention. This was igniting He Hung's very large fire, and he instantly threw himself in. An hour later, the servant started to move the bathtub and hot water to Zhang Yuan. These Taijian all carefully kept their head down, afraid to even look twice at the clothing and ornaments on the ground. But just from the clothing on the ground, they knew just how fiery it had been between Wang Yi and Wang Fei. Chu Qingju sprawled at the border of the tub, permitting He Hung to knead her shoulders. Her voice carried laziness as she asked, I heard we have a property in the Jing suburbs. It has hot springs? You like them? He Hung's hand touched the fine skin and smiled as his chest glued itself onto that smooth and thin back. Yuquan Yuan 3 does have a large hot spring. In a few days, I'll take you to play for a few days. That would be good. Chu Qingju tilted her head to gently kiss He Heng's face. Wang Yi, don't forget. A beautiful woman giving a kiss was naturally a good thing. He Heng stole a few more from Chu Qingju's lips before confirming. Things that I have promised you, I won't forget. Chu Qingju smiled as she straightened her head. The inky strands of hair flowed in the water, hiding the bottom of the tub. When she came to Kueyuan Palace, Chu Qingju found that there were a few more hints of life this time. There were even more servants around, as though they were deliberately acting out such liveliness. Following He Heng into the main hall, she saw the Emperor and Empress there as expected. The person sitting directly under was Jean and Princess Royal. Under Jean and Princess were He Yuan and Qin Bai Lu. Chu Qingju felt that the Rue Wang couple had come quickly this time and weren't too proud. After she finished her greeting with He Heng, they sat down opposite the couple of He Yuan. Chu Qingju, as usual, drank tea and lowered her head. Qing de Emperor and as a father, he might not be a good one, but at the very least, he still followed social conventions. Sitting at the top, he very rarely looked at his two Erxifu and only talked with his two sons. A quick while later, the Ning Wang couple arrived. Chu Qingju watched as the two sat above them, and He Qi started to amuse the emperor. She couldn't help but think each imperial son was a master of flattery from birth. Since your deity have all arrived, Zhen will ask you one more time, do you really want to separate? Qing de Emperor gave a sigh. The old face showing tiredness. Guanyin, Zhen shouldn't have given you in marriage to that boy of the Chao family. It has nothing to do with Fu Huang. It's knowing someone's face, not knowing their heart. Back then, it was this daughter that had agreed before Fu Huang decreed the marriage. Basically, it was this daughter who didn't have a good eye. Guanyin 4 was Jean and Princess Royal's name. This name had been personally chosen by Qing de Emperor. Perhaps it was that when choosing this name, Qing de Emperor had thought that this daughter, even if she had married, still remembered this home of hers that was the palace, so he named her Guanyin. Chu Qingju found that the emperor treated Jean and Princess very well, better than the three sons other than He Yuan. Maybe it was that Jean and Princess was his first child, that the feelings were different. These years, this daughter and the Count of Bai Lu were full of respect in and in harmony with each other. But now, the Count of Bai Lu's heart is not with I and the children any longer. He didn't even care about my identity and the old feelings as he involved himself with a 9th-grade official. He can humiliate this daughter, but he cannot humiliate the imperial family. Such a heartless man. What use would I keep him for? Separation, it would allow me to have clean days. Jean and Princess gave a bitter smile. Otherwise, if I force myself to be with him, this daughter will feel disgust. Chapter 47. The Imperial Knife Corps. The front hall fell into a period of silence. Then Chu Qingju heard Qing de Emperor gave a sigh. Since that is so, then Zhan will allow you to separate from the Count of Bai Lu. As to your children, they will be raised by you. Let your deity help some in the future. Finishing, Qing de Emperor looked at the three brothers. Do you have any objections? He Qi and He Yuan quickly demonstrated they had none. But it was He Heng that stood to ask. Fu Huang, after separation, Zhang Jie will be raising 2 children by herself. Even if us brothers will be there to it, it still might be too difficult. Why don't Fu Hong bestow a title on nephew and niece? When Qing de Emperor had originally seen He Heng stand, his expression hadn't been good. After He Heng had finished, his face showed a smile. Lao is right. It should be like this. We will especially decree Cheng'er to be the Marquis of Dingzhong, Shin'er as Rui Junju. Both shall change their surname to their mother's. After they grow up, then they will be titled. This was a true grace. He Heng's nephew and niece would change their surnames from Chao to He, and also received a title. In the future, no one in Jing would slight them because of their father. If they touched the imperial name, their statuses were drastically different. Jean and Princess Royal hadn't thought that it would be this smooth. She stood with tears in her eyes to thank Qing de Emperor. After the bow, she furtively looked at He Heng. Chu Qingju noticed that glance and knew the other was going to remember the gigantic boon He Heng had given her. To this, He Qi and He Yuan didn't have any objections, but hated He Heng for being the one to do so. Even if this nephew did change to the surname He, It couldn't affect them competing for the throne and had no strong relationship to them. It was better to follow Fu Huang's desires, and he could do a favor. Sitting at the side, the empress, who hadn't spoke at all, changed the look on her face. Jean and Princess wasn't her blood daughter, but she had raised her for many years. They naturally held mutual feelings for each other. Jean was humiliated. The most hurt was her as the mother. But she wasn't favored by the emperor and could only sigh. Hearing that the emperor was rewarding the two grandchildren, she had no more worries about Jean and Princess' separation. After the matter was settled, Qing the emperor stood. Jean still has matters and will leave first. If that boy from the Chao family comes, you don't have to be courteous. The decree that Jean will give him will be sent down tomorrow. These words meant, the man who bullied Jean's daughter, you can play whatever with, and Jean will take care of it. Chu Qingju quietly shed 2 large crocodile tears for the Count of Beilu, landing on the hands of the He brothers. If he didn't die, he'll shed layers. After Qing the emperor left, the atmosphere in the hall seemed to relax a fraction. Chu Qingju picked a small chopped piece of sugarcane and put in her mouth. After she chomped and sucked for the liquid, she hid her mouth as she spat out the remainder into the fine plate that a palace maid held with a bent waist. She ate a few more pieces before she wiped her mouth clean. She felt slightly constrained. Sugar cane. It needed one to bite off a piece, and then another to chew for it to be enjoyable. Eating like this, it didn't have the freedom that was present biting the sugar cane off. But the act of eating was much prettier. Wei Qingyi almost couldn't believe her eyes. How did Chu Qingju dare to eat sugar cane in front of others? Wasn't she afraid of her eating appearance? She watched as Chu Qingju crisply chewed on a few more pieces before wiping her mouth. She jerked the corners of her lips. Dime has a good appetite. Chu Qingju smiled. Sweet things are eaten to make one feel better. She handed the dirty handkerchief to Yuzan, who was behind her, and took the clean handkerchief Mu Jin handed her. Dasa should try sometime. Wei Qingyi gave a short dry laugh. I don't like using such snacks. To me, living in this world is for eating and drinking. Dasa, don't laugh at me. Chu Qingju laughed unconcernedly. He heard this and just smiled. He clearly didn't feel that Chu Qingju placed too much importance on food, but felt that his Wang Fei was so honest. Of course, this was due to the fact that when a person held good feelings as they looked at another, whatever they did was good. He Qi raised his head and coincidentally saw the smile on He Heng's face. He gave a sigh, feeling that his teeth were slightly sore. Ersa is very careful about food and clothing. Qin Bai Lu smiled as she looked at Chu Qingju. What the other wore was both carefully chosen and beautiful. This type of sugar cane is both crisp and sweet. I like eating this in the winter. Jean and Princess took a piece of sugar cane as well. After she spat out the piece, she said, it seems that her may has some preferences in common with me. Finishing, she smiled at Chu Qingju. Chu Qingju returned a smile. That's great. In the future, if I find something tasty, there's someone I can share it with. Hearing this, Jean and Princess looked at He Heng. She teased, this is your fault, Erdi. How could you let Dime experience delicious food alone? When she finished, she saw Chu Qingju's face flush. Jean and Princess roared with laughter. Jejia, don't tease. He Heng gave a bow and pled. Otherwise someone's face will be like a monkey's ass. Nonsense, nonsense. Where in this world could there be such a beautiful monkey's ass? What words couldn't you use, that you had to use such a vulgar one? The Empress smiled as she carefully examined Chu Qingju's face. Ben Gong feels. It looks more similar to the heavenly peaches of the heavenly Empress. Finishing, she laughed first. Chu Qingju bore a face full of bashfulness as she tilted her head to glare at He Heng. Then she buried her head to drink tea. That glare she gave caused He Heng's bones to feel soft. He stood and pleaded for mercy from the two. He was subjected to a torrent of laughter. Once again, he understood a truth. A man couldn't participate in the world of women. When He Yuan lowered his head, he coincidentally saw the glare Chu Qingju gave He Heng. It did have that bit of flavor. He raised an eyebrow to look at the still pleading and forcefully smiling He Heng, his eyes carrying a hint of examination. Just as everyone was laughing, a Tai Jian came in to report that the Count of Beilu was asking for an audience. The mirth on Jean and Princess' face retreated like the tide. She adjusted her clothing and icily held up a teacup. The Empress' face went cold. She said in a heavy tone, "Let him roll in." At this instant, Chu Qingju felt that the Empress was full of maternal protectiveness. She turned to look towards the door and saw a man with an extremely elegant appearance bow slightly as he walked in. Just from the appearance, he was a man who easily created good feelings in women. So, this world had invented a phrase to describe this kind of man, that was an animal in clothing. This son-in-law greets Muhu, meets Didi. Who is your Didi? Not just everybody can call Bin Wang Didi. He Yuan snorted and lazily leaned back on the chair. He looked indolent. Don't try to stick gold to your face. You don't feel embarrassed, but I still find it blinding. Chu Qingju silently swallowed a mouthful of tea. This He Yuan's mouth was a knife, and there was poison on this knife. The Count of Bei Lu hadn't expected that he would be harassed right after he entered. But the other was a Wang Yi, so he could only endure. Just this cowardly state, he still dares to womanize outside. He dirties my eyes. He Qi happily added a knife. Deji, your words are slightly wrong. When Didi saw the Count of Bei Lu a few years ago, he had proper conduct, and was almost enough to be worthy of Zhang Jia. He hung blue at the leaves in the teacup and continued at a sedate pace. Only now did I know, the Count of Bei Lu is a good actor. I'm afraid that none of the famous corners of Jin can compare to him. Otherwise, how dare he trick us imperial family for so many years? To compare the Count of Bei Lu to an actor, Chu Qingju felt that He Hong had inserted a good knife. It was even more painful considering that when after he spoke his first sentence, the Count of Bei Lu had given him a gaze of hope. And really, all these brothers were good at inserting a knife while being bloodless. Chu Qingju gave a dry cough. She remarked to Jin and Princess, Zhang Jia, don't be sad. Who doesn't meet a disgusting thing or two in their life? Don't let these things affect your mood and dirty your gaze. She felt that at this, if she didn't add a knife, she didn't fit in with the crowd. Even Wei Qingyi and Qin Bailu at this time attacked in the same direction. The body is not right, the conduct is not right, it's unbearable. Qin Bailu disdainfully moved her gaze aside, acting as though she didn't want to see a disgusting object. Wei Qingyi's words were relatively softer. She said, expressionless, "The Count of Bei Lu Darren, when you did such a thing, did you think of Princess and your children? Now that you have hardened Princess' heart, you want to rescue it. Do you feel that us imperial family members are easy to bully?" The people who spoke all were of higher status than the Count of Bei Lu. The Count of Bei Lu felt that these words were a humiliation and hatred formed in his heart towards Jin and Princess, but he could only kneel in the hall and beg for forgiveness. Jin and Princess looked at the cowardly man in front of her eyes. At the beginning in Jingzhou, she hadn't seen him as regretful as this. For that woman, he had even been angry at her. He was afraid now, so he put on such an act. How did she even fall for this man in the first place? Moving her gaze away in disgust, Jin and Princess stood and said, "Muhu, this daughter is somewhat tired. I'll return first to the back to rest." Finishing, she didn't look again at the Count of Bei Lu and held the hand of a palace made to leave the main hall. The Count of Bei Lu's heart froze. He knew that this incident couldn't be resolved. He could only heavily kowtow to the Empress, describing how regretful he was, describing how he would repent his ways, and started reminiscing about the good of the princess and how he wanted to go back to the time when they had good feelings for each other. Ben Gong feels that Lao Er's words aren't right. This Count of Bei Lu isn't some good actor. He's one of the storytellers in the tea shops. Look at his words. If one didn't already know, they would think that the imperial family was making too much of a fuss over nothing. The Empress gave a cold laugh. You don't have to kowtow. Don't bleed on the floor of my Kuei Yuan place. Quickly roll away. When Ben Gong sees you, Ben Gong gets angry. There wasn't a mother that would be happy at a cheating son-in-law. The conduct of the Empress was already very constrained. In a normal family, the Count of Bei Lu would have already beaten to the point his mother didn't recognize him. Chu Qingju saw the Count of Bei Lu forcibly dragged away by the Taijian and said disdainfully, "Thankfully nephew and niece didn't see this state of his." He Hong heard this and thought about those two children, not even 10 years old. He sighed. Separation is good, better than having such a father. He didn't know why he started thinking about Chang de Gong Fu. his brows unconsciously furrowing. Chapter 48 Brothers? After the Count of Beilu was dragged out of Kuei Yuan Palace, the brothers of the He family each held their heads down and drank tea. They listened to their wives converse, and if they didn't have to speak, they wouldn't say even one additional word. The conflict between He Yuan and He Qi had been almost pushed to the surface. Recently, when Lao Asai and Wei Wenguang were sent to Jiangnan to investigate the case, who knew that just a few days after they left Jing, they encountered an assassination attempt. Both Wei Wenguang and Lao Asai were wounded, stopping in their trip to recover. Many Tai from the Imperial Hospital had been sent. By this time, the two were in no danger of danger, but a storm was raging in the Imperial court. Who would have such daring to assassinate the Imperial envoys? Those that would dare, they were either rebel or a person of great power and status. The Dulong dynasty had already ruled for hundreds of years. There weren't any of the so-called rebels. Those assassins could have only been sent by a personal of great power. Then why would such a person do a thing like this? There were already people at the court that were guessing the matter was connected to Rui Wang. But this matter had been given to Ning Wang to investigate. This time, Ning Wang's mouth was securely sealed. No news had been leaked. Rui Wang also didn't seem to be acting differently, so everyone then felt Rui Wang wouldn't have such daring to do it. That kind of conduct was almost akin to opposing the emperor. No matter how much Rui Wang was worried and how arrogant he wasn't outrageous to this step. The empress was clear to the conflict between the three brothers. Seeing that it was almost the noon hour, she said, "It's so rare for you three brothers to gather together. Ben Gong is happy, let's go eat together." The three pairs followed the empress to the table. A short while later, someone ushered the princess and the two children over. The elder child, He Cheng, was only 7 or 8. He wore a red cotton robe, a long life lock around his neck. He looked very adorable. The smaller was He Xian. She looked almost 5 years old, her eyes large. Her smile was very cute. The two children together felt very much like the golden boy and jade girl of legend. Greetings to Imperial Grandmother, greetings to Jujio and Jiumu. The two children gave a proper bow. It could be seen that Jean and Princess had raised them well. Even Chu Qingju, who felt that little children were noisy, liked them. Cheng'er and Xian'er have grown so much. Wei Qingyi, who had seen the two before, smiled as she gave the two a meeting gift. She remarked to Jean and Princess, "Last time when I saw these two, Xian'er wasn't walking. Now she has grown to be an intelligent girl." Jean and Princess gave a gentle smile. "Just a naughty child. She's not as good as you praise her to be." Chu Qingju had prepared a meeting gift very long ago. Hearing Jean and Princess say such a thing, she interjected, "Zhang Jie, you can't criticize those children this way. I like these two very much." Speaking, she waved her hand at the two children. "Cheng'er, Xian'er, come over for Jimu to take a look." He Cheng and He Xian obediently walked in front of Chu Qingju, carefully examining this Jimu. Her face becoming rosy red, He Xian timidly reached with a hand to pull on Chu Qingju's sleeve. "Nice to meet her, Jimu." "Nice to meet Xian'er." Chu Qingju bent to place He Xian onto her own knee. She took a pendant from Mu Jin's hands to hang on Xian'er's neck. Jimu is giving you this as a toy." He Xian bent down to look at the pendant. It was a blooming lotus flower, the craftsmanship making it appear almost real. And the entire jade stone was transparent like ice. It was very beautiful and suitable for females to wear. Jean and Princess found that this pendant was carved from an ice jade. This type of jade was extremely rare. It was more beautiful than glass and extremely expensive. She hadn't expected that her daimai would use something as valuable as this to give to a child as a meeting gift. Daimai, she's just a child. She doesn't need to use such a rare jade. Half of Jean and Princess' words were courtesy, half was real. Us imperial family's daughters, nothing is too precious to wear. Chu Qingju smiled as she touched He Xian's hair buns. "Our Xian'er is more beautiful than jade. I was afraid that this jade was too tacky for our Gunyang." Finishing, she took another jade pendant from Mu Jin's hands. "Here, Cheng'er, this is for you." He Cheng looked at Jean and Princess, and seeing the princess didn't block him, he took it and gave a bow. "Thank you, Urjum." He spread his palm. It was a bat carved from a piece of black jade. Bats represented good fortune and were appropriate to give to young children. Jean and Princess saw that her daimyo had given very thoughtful gifts. These two jade pendants had been carved skillfully. The material itself was rare and couldn't be found in normal places. She said to Hixin, "Xiner, come down quickly from Urjiamu's knee. Don't crush your Urjiamu. Sit beside your mother here and prepare to eat." Hixin jumped down from Chu Qingju's knee and smiled as she ran to the spot beside Jean and Princess. Hicheng followed her as she sat down. Chu Qingju gave a sigh as she watched. The children in the previous life really should learn from these children. The gap was too large. Wei Qingyi had already met the two children before, so it didn't matter if she gave a less weighty gift. But Qin Bai Lu fell into an awkward state. Both she and Chu Qingju were newly married. The first meeting with these two children, Chu Qingju gave out gifts before her. The gifts she had already prepared were embarrassing in comparison. Thinking that Chu Qingju was purposefully embarrassing her, Qin Bai Lu silently marked down another strike against Chu Qingju. She put on a bold face and gave out the objects. Jean and Princess held a normal attitude as she gave her thanks, but she felt that Jean and Princess clearly was more intimate with Chu Qingju. The palace maid streamed in with teacups and copper basins as well as towels. Chu Qingju and He Hong sat together. After washing hands and rinsing mouths, there were many more maids in Taijian that came in. Delicious food, steams, sautéed or fried, were set down like a flow water. The palace maids that held the plates each had pale white hands. Presenting the white porcelain plates, it made for a beautiful image that increased the appetite. This made her think back to the memoir of a certain last emperor of a dynasty from the previous life. This scene in front of her didn't differ much from that memoir. It might be even more outrageous, since this was the golden age of the Long dynasty. In reality, everything about the meal the nobility used was good, except for the rule that there was to be no speaking while eating. Chu Qingju was somewhat unused to such a practice. In the previous life, she always ate while either having a phone call or organizing an artist's schedule during the meantime. Here, she seemed to be in a retired state. There were no cell phones or computers. She could only read, practice her writing, and draw. Originally, she had a bit of interest towards the qi, but after a few times, He Hung wasn't willing to play with her. Her life instantly became boring. After the noon meal, the queen didn't keep the three brothers. The brothers took their own wives as they walked out of Kuei Yuan Palace. Coming out of the main gate of Kuei Yuan Palace, He Yuan took Qin Bai Lu with him as he separated from the other two brothers. He Qi and He Hung didn't mind. After He Yuan's figure disappeared, He Qi said, "This morning, news came from outside Jing. Sidi's wounds are better, but his arm might have problems remaining. When it's winter, it will ache." He Hung gave a sigh and held his hands up to the sky together. Thank heavens nothing major happened to Sid. Otherwise, there will be one person less among us brothers to play together in the future. Exactly. He Qi's words were full of rage as he said, "This evildoer is too daring, too outrageous. He dares to assassinate an imperial son and a prime minister. This is the imperial envoy representing Fu Huang." Walking at He Heng's side, Chu Qingju's eyebrow twitched slightly before instantly returning to normal. De Ji has to find the person hiding in the back and get justice on behalf of Sid and Minister Wei. He Hung bowed to He Qi with two fists raised together. De Ji, thanks for your trouble. This matter already has some leads. He Qi returned a bow. It's no trouble. This is what I should do. He Hung heard this, smiled and didn't reply. He Qi didn't care if he responded. He raised his hands in a fist. Gidge still has matters to attend to. I'll leave first. Finishing, he strode towards another path. Wei Qingyi slightly bowed to He Hung before quickly following. Chu Qingju and He Hung returned a bow. Looking at the backs of the Ning Wang couple, the two sedately walked towards the exit of the palace. Debo seems to be full of life these days. Chu Qingju serenely opened. He seems to be even more majestic than usual. He Hung detected that Chu Qingju had words within her words. He smiled. It may be that it was the holidays earlier. He ate too much meat and drank too much. Those normal citizens hoped to touch a bit of oil during the holidays. As a member of the imperial family, when did he not eat well? Chu Qingju giggled and said, "Wang Yi is right." After the two got on the carriage, He Hung then said, Wei Wenguang comes from the same branch as the Changde Gong Fu Lao Tai Tai's maternal family. But Wei Wenguang is of Shu birth. During his earlier years, he was met with much cold care from the family Wei. Now, he's a bit at odds with the family Wei, and the entire family Wei is slowly declining. Chu Qingju hadn't thought that there would be such a connection. She thought about the conduct of the Lao Taidai of Changde Gong Fu and had to admit that He Heng's words were reasonable. Lao Taidai was much colder to me. In the past, when people from the Wei family came to the Fu, they liked to flatter San Mei and brother Wang Ji. It must have been that time that the family Wei was already not well. He Hung knew that his Wang Fei was, in reality, a very intelligent woman. It could be seen from how she treated others and received gifts. She was able to clearly prioritize and recognize what was important. She didn't demean the status of Duan Wang Fu because Rue Wang Fu was favored. She didn't slight Jin and Zhang Jie because she came back to Jing with only her children. When it was time to be aggressive, she never retreated. When it was time to be gentle, she was never willful. This type of woman most likely took after Tian Shi, that she could be so intelligent. Clearly, in the heart of the most honored Duan Qin Wang, Changde Gong Fu was a pile of idiots and his Wang Fei was a pure white lotus flower untouched by the mud. In the future, our Fu's gifts to Xiangqing Ho Fu should increase a few fractions. He Heng's tone was serious as he continued. The Tian family's conduct is strict. There is no harm to you in having closer relations with them. What was this tone that held hints of gladness? Chu Qingju jerked her lips. She nodded and confirmed, all right. He Hung smiled and then gravely said, in the future, stay further away from people from Ning Wang Fu. He knew that Chu Qingju was at odds with the people of Rue Wang Fu and didn't need his reminder. Chu Qingju paused slightly before nodding gravely. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.